Hello there and welcome to The Value of Everything. For this episode, I have a great discussion with the Humbug Show regarding Australian real estate, why Australia is screwing itself over, immigration, surveillance state, mind control, who is in control, and we go a bit deep and a little bit into religion at the end as well. We do begin talking about microphones and stuff for podcasting initially. I just thought it would be kind of useful if anybody's interested in it, just to leave that in. Just know that I was recording it on my side, so his sound may be a little bit compressed than what you're used to. But if you want to get past that, skip, and our discussion will continue on from there. You can find the Humbug Show by typing into your browser humbugshow.com, and also it's available on YouTube. There's a lot of sense coming from that direction, and it was a thoroughly interesting rabble across all of these topics. So let me now drop you into the show. Just like to say, your microphone sounds beautiful, by the way. You got the Joe Rogan one, haven't you?
Yeah, the 7B, yeah. I used to be a muso when I was younger, and I've done a fair bit of radio and stuff in my time. So
yeah,
it's you can make this mic sound bad, but you really have to put some work in to make it sound crap.
Yeah, that's the it's a dynamic one, isn't it? It's not the you don't have to put some phantom power into that.
No, this is that's a tricky thing. So I'm running. I've got a 7B,
yeah,
and then I've got a Rode NT1 as well.
Okay.
Now, the 7B requires about 65 dB a gain, right? Which means the audience, even though they can technically power them on their own,
yeah,
are right at their noise floor limit to power a 7B. So I have a FET head that I put in, and that uses the phantom power and converts the phantom power into 25 dB a gain.
Yeah.
So if you get a FET head, you can whack it in, and then you're running your audience probably, because I've got an ID4 for mine, you're running it at probably 50%, 60% of gain.
Oh, you got an audience as well, have you?
Yeah, I've just got the ID4 though.
Oh.
But then I went and when the missus, I did some live shows, and the missus was like, "Oh, you want a hand?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then she started the conversation as well, and so I went and bought a little Mackie mixer.
Right, yeah.
And so I run it all through the Mackie mixer to kind of when I live show, so I don't have to worry about EQing it so much. And yeah, that just goes from there. And it seems I use, I don't know, about 50 decibels off the Mackie, and I probably use about 15 decibels out of the audience.
Yeah. I've done this very, very long-winded thing of audio where I've literally gone around the whole houses. I used to have like one of those Shure headpiece things to my thing, and it was originally used when I was in the car and I was just doing a load of podcasts from my car and driving along. And then I went into this massive weird phase of getting I don't even know what it's called now, but you use tubes to power your microphone. And I was still using this crappy microphone thing, and some guy just said, "Do you know, you might want to just try and change your microphone because you're trying to put like all this power into this little tiny microphone." And then I just changed it. And so
what are you on now? It sounds nice.
Yeah, I mean it's clear, but I'm not messing around with it anymore. It's the Shure Beta
58,
87A.
Oh, 87, yeah, condenser. That's why it sounds so nice in your voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good microphone, and pretty much everyone sounds good on that mic too. That's the other thing.
Yeah, and it's got. I think it like cuts out the background a little bit as well, which is quite kind of good. And I'm not mucking around with my sound anymore. I'm just going to leave it be, and I'm not adding bass. I'm not doing anything as long as it's fairly clear. Then I'm happy with it now because I just spent too much time and spent too much money on it.
It's a never-ending game. If you get caught in the OCD of audio, you're done for.
Nobody cares. Why you
no, no, really.
Although I appreciate what your sound, but beyond that is that one person that's going to find that.
But that's because we live and breathe in these things. They're our tools for our trade. But for most people, I always say to most people, I'm like, really, you should spend probably $200, $300 on a good mic. Spend about $300 on a good interface, and just appreciate how you naturally sound and don't mess with it too much. You start messing with it with compressors and, instead of buying compressor limiters and all that stuff, just learn how to use a freaking microphone. Learn where to speak into it and learn what you sound like,
Yep. Actually, and one of those things I've got actually is the cheapest, when you think, okay, what do I do with my microphone on? Should I buy this stand and have it all angled and everything like that? I've got the cheapest thing from eBay. You know the thing that you can hang around your neck to put the microphone on top of, and it's just got a little sort of thing where it's just sitting on my chest and it's raised a bit. That's it.
Yeah,
simple.
That's clever. No, that's the way to do it. If you ever upgrade, get one of the Rode PSA arms.
I know what you're talking about as well. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
I've got two of them, and like the first one I paid full price for and stuck the 7B on, and then a guy around the corner was selling his crap, and I bought one for $50 off him, and I use that for my acoustic guitar recordings and things with the NT on it. And I've never had a boom or a microphone. If you're constantly pulling them in and out to do things, it's just they're just heaven outside of that.
Yeah. And another way, do you have any previous radio experience? Because you do sound like you're a pro in some ways.
Yeah, well, I was a professional magician in my 20s.
Oh, there you go.
I've done a fair bit of community radio. I've done some commercial radio too.
Ah, there we go. Yeah.
And then I've done a lot of. You could say I was a corporate speaker. I used to be a high-level manager for a lot of companies in Australia, and so I would have to give a lot of leadership, team dynamic speeches, efficiency speeches, delivery of outcome speeches, things like that.
Because you're doing it all in one take as well. Because I noticed that, like,
I
always have to throw in a few ums and ers, and I'm noticing that your error rate is very marginal, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I think it's just what I'm born to do in a weird way. I'm just lucky with it. They are in there. I used to record a lot of music, and my flatmate in my 20s, his brother's actually one of the biggest sound engineers in the world. And he used to love just sticking a mic in front of me, give me a couple of Johnnies and Cokes, and he'd just record the whole thing flat through. And when he would get out the other end, he'd leave all the little errors in the music.
Yeah.
And people would listen to it and they'd go, oh, that sounds real, because it has these little mistakes in it. But one of the things is having it as a live discussion, whether it's live or whether it's pre-recorded, it always sounds consistent and genuine.
Yeah.
And I think one of the problems that especially older people have is when they watch things like Philip DeFranco, the jump cuts bother them because there's no space for reflection in DeFranco. It's like he says something and then jump cuts to the next thing. And when you're recording in this method, the moments in between add a lot more emphasis where you want it to.
Yeah.
And you do that unconsciously without even thinking about it. And I think that's one of the beauties of not over-editing. I mean, it makes my workflow incredibly quick.
Yes, I know. I've spent hours, like literally tons of hours on editing beforehand when I'm just trying to take every and out of my talks. And you'll notice there's some that in my past that are well edited and some that are just crap. And I'm just like, talking as I go along. But
but at the end of the day, you're better off doing it with, at least it's done. It's like there's a million people who always talk to me and go, I want to do a podcast, and they never even get around to recording one. I'm like, well, pull your phone out and do one. Put your headset in, your standard phone headset, and record that. And if you can't make that work, then don't bother spending any money. You just got to do it. Once you're doing it, then you can refine it till you want. For me personally, I think the small errors in language kind of have a lot of substance to making it sound more real.
Definitely. Yeah, if you ever hear any interview, you want to hear every single pause and murmur, anything really. It gives you it decodes there's little nuances to language that you don't quite notice, do you? That it does register for me anyway.
And the other thing too is when you're doing something straight out and then you get to a live situation, it really does come through. Like a lot of live shows that people watch, they're boring. They're people responding to something. They've got time to think. If you ever go back and have a look at some of my live shows and jump through them, the passion comes through because you've got this stream. I think that's the key. Because I used to prep the show. I'd write stuff out. Earlier episodes, I had show notes and I broke it down and I had my major points. And nowadays, I literally just get through the week and I have a bunch of researchers who work for me as free interns nowadays, just luckily. They like the show and they went, I'll help you. And I'm like, great. And so they send me a bunch of links and I load them up. And while I'm actually working in the real world, I kind of just keep a track on my phone and have all the links for that week and then throw them up in a browser. I read through them, find the highlight bits I need to have and then hit record and I just start to finish it.
Another one is where you mentioned hypnotism. The one thing I was writing down, I was actually just trying to put a couple of thoughts I had into my head into the notes I was doing that today, and I was thinking, I really talk about like, is it Project Hummingbird and mind control, mass mind control. Have you?
Oh, the MK Ultra.
Yes, yeah, MK Ultra.
Offshoot. Yeah. I've done some heavy research into that. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It gets pretty deep in that stuff.
Yes, and yeah, once you open like sort of the doors to that, and you think, okay, so somebody could be controlled.
Oh, I'll tell you right now.
Yeah,
I can't give you names and stuff, but I have from a Pentagon colonel been told directly they know what they're doing, and this stuff does exist.
Yeah, exactly, and
yeah, like it's real. It's not fake.
Yeah.
It's real.
You just need to just put a couple of things together. Like, does hypnotism exist? Yes, it does. And then once you open that, then there's certain light hypnotism, and then there's extreme hypnotism, and there's total indoctrination, mixing indoctrination with the hypnotism from birth, and then maybe use some kind of pain as well, and just break the mind and separate them into multiple different personalities.
It's even easier than that. I'll give you it this way. We're all individually motivated by particular values, right? Like one person will be motivated by money. Ultimately, they'll do anything for money. Someone else might do anything for their family, whatever else. We all have our values.
Yeah.
If you can instill from a very young age, and you will value not only what is valuable to you, but it's like this is the difference between your true self and the persona self that you push out to the world. If you get into the Jung type idea or the Freudian type idea of super ego and things like that. When you look at that type of thing, we get conditioned very heavily. So there's a lot of things in the media that protect particular things, like sex. A very poor version of sex is protected by the media. Real making love and things like that are always left out of it. But sex itself is allowed in the media. Just real connection of love is not allowed in the media. And things like that, we get over and over exposed to these things. And so people start to pick them up as these values, but they are not their values. This is the idea of Krishnamurti, who says, no one can tell you what life is. You have to discover what you are in life to, have your process. And so what happens is by telling people that these things that may not be important to them and most likely are not important to them are important, they create a persona to try and satisfy that from a social point because they don't want to be rejected sociologically.
Yep.
And they separate from themselves. They create a very big gap between the persona that they have and themselves. And that separation causes pain. You don't even have to cause pain. The actual selling people that money and fame is important will separate them from their true nature of themselves anyway. And that separation causes pain internally at a very, very low, quiet level that no one notices.
Yep.
Then once you have all of that, then you create, 1984 talks about the double speak idea. You tell someone that one thing is good and bad at the same time, and that confuses them. And what I found a lot, and then on top of that, we have things that are called modality. If you look into NLP, there's a thing called modalities, and modality speaks about some people are, just to use one modality, for example, some people move towards pleasure, and some people are motivated by moving away from pain. And you're not going to be both. You'll be one or the other typically. Like we're talking 89% of your behavior will be one or the other. So if you have a salesperson and they're an away from pain person, they'll make a lot of money one week and then they'll relax because they've got money and they're not in pain anymore. So they'll relax until they lose money, and then you kick their ass as a boss, and then they'll go make money again. They're an away from pain person. If you have a towards pleasure person who is a salesperson, they'll earn week in and week out because they feel good by earning. So what life predominantly does is it forces us into positions where we're behaving in a way that is not ourselves. We're told to change our behavior to fit what we have rather than discovering who we are not, therefore discovering who we are and doing what we're true. And it's that complete incongruence that we're taught to do from a very young age that makes us very susceptible to stresses. And when you look at hypnosis, the three people that are easy to hypnotize are highly intelligent, highly creative, and highly stressed people, which is why the news is, always telling you that people are dying outside. Bill Hicks had the best one. Look outside the curtains. It's like no one's murdering anyone out there. But the news will tell you the worst of the world because it keeps everyone stressed on edge, which means they're more pliable, which means they're more likely to pick up a command. So when you're hit...
Sorry, just on that one, when you said the most intelligent, I thought an intelligent person would sort of go to question what that person's trying to do to them and say, maybe not. Maybe like I would think that the person who's more susceptible is the most gullible. But if it's
it's highly intelligent. Hypnosis is a very unique state of trance, and okay, so when you see like a Martin St. James or anyone who walks up and goes sleep to someone and they like fall, they kind of pass, they look like they semi-pass out, right?
Yeah.
When you see that actual thing. All, everyone goes, what's the secret to that? And it's like, there is no secret, but it's like TV magic, you don't see everything that's going on. So they don't just walk up to them and say that unless they've tried it probably about 20 times in public and just got a good lucky person. Yeah. Sometimes you don't see the 19 fails before that one success.
Yeah.
What it is if you were to give me someone, who was slightly difficult and I was to go for, that's called an authoritative induction. If I was going to do an authoritative induction, just tell them to sleep and have them go into that command. What I would do is saying sleep and having them go into that reaction is a very big request. So what you do is before you get to the big request, you do this little small chain. So I might say to them, stand over here. And if they walk over there, they've complied a little bit. Then I'll say, put your hands by your side. If they do that, they've complied again. And I'll get 8 or 9 little small compliances out of them. You hear a hypnotist say, put your feet flat on the floor, lean back, take a deep breath.
Mini Stockholm syndrome you're sort of creating for them.
Yeah, you're creating little compliances. So by the time you ask for the big compliance, their unconscious mind is going, well, I've complied 9 times to their little request and nothing bad's happened. So this must be okay. I feel good. I feel safe. So therefore I'll do the big compliance. And that's what a lot of the way I see it. When you look at the world, they ask of you a lot of small compliances before they hit the big compliance. And that's typically how they catch people off guard. It's like if you get into the discussion of RBTs and MDTs on New South Wales roads, both of them violate constitutional law, which says we have right to free travel across the state. That's what the Constitution says from 1901. However, an RBT stops and they actually hold you up. Now, granted, people will go, well, this is a good thing because drunk drivers are really bad. And everyone goes, yeah, okay. So people choose to allow an RBT to happen and not go to the High Court and fight it for being, prevented from free travel across the state because they validate it and going, oh, well, drunk drivers don't drive. Then they bring in the MDT laws where they're taking your genetic material effectively from you and they're testing you for substances that haven't been proven to actually increase the rate of accidents, which is the problem, right?
Yeah.
So a small compliance on an RBT is then turned into a very large compliance of an MDT. And people are very stressed about the MDTs, typically because deep down they know there's something really wrong about that idea. And they're the small compliances. And these are the little discrepancies that people go, oh, it doesn't matter. And those, oh, it doesn't matter are when they've got you to comply to something that you really probably should be complaining about, And people they're lazy. So they go along with it.
Absolutely. All right. I just want to go into one of the first topics is the Australian property market, which is probably the most central thing, I think, in probably my life and most other people that you talk to. It's what else is more important, really, to start a family, have a house, something to provide, work towards, provide for your children. That whole system is really just has been eroded over time. This used to be the lucky country, the fair go country. You could, I don't know, a standard person could work a full-time job. The wife could stay at home and you could enjoy a fairly happy life. You probably wouldn't go on holiday abroad, but you'd still have a fairly decent life and you have enough for a retirement at home, everything else. It's gone now, isn't it?
I think it has. I think you made a really good point. It's the home is a representation of the brick and mortar, basically, of the family unit. And the family unit is the philosophical thing that we actually started society off. When you think about it, before we had family, we had tribes, and family is how little families connect and create society. And the home is the physical manifestation of the ideal of family, as you said. And it really has been lost. I mean, I guess it was about the 80s or the 90s when you started seeing both parents working. Real estate prices went up, and it really has become, especially in Sydney, it's absolutely exorbitant. I was always taught when I was young that we should spend 30% of our income on our mortgage or our rent or whatever it may be. And nowadays, it's common to hear 50 or 60% is going into that, which changes a lot of the dynamics. And anything that happens, as you said, like, your house is not only your family, it's also your legacy to your kids. It's something you can leave to your kids so that if they have a bad time, they've got something to cover them over their head. And we all need a roof over our heads. It's a critical part. I often talk to smart old guys and they talk about the Gordon Gekko syndrome, this greed is good idea that came from the 80s, and businesses has to grow by 10% every year. And unfortunately, the home, which was originally a sacred thing, got put on the money market like everything does, and everyone got concerned with investment houses. And the boomers, the boomers did a lot of good stuff. They also have their own problems. Every generation has good and bad. But the boomers buying up the property market the way they did through the 90s and the early 2000s created a situation where the properties were then just a monetary thing, and it all became about purchasing properties. I always think of it, it's a bit, to me, I mean, one thing I think the Islamics do well is they don't charge interest on mortgages for your family home.
Yep. Yeah.
And I think
usury.
Yeah. And I think that's a brilliant idea. And I think that's something that we really need to have a look at in the Western world.
Christians have that. The Christians seem to have forgotten about that one, but usury was an important factor.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't have anything wrong. If you're going to buy an investment property, by all means, charge interest on a mortgage of investment property, because it's something that's beyond what you need. It's an extension. It's a luxury to have an investment property. So to tax someone off a luxury, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
However, the family home is something, and it is critical too, because the largest percentage of your income goes to the family home. I think it really is important that we look at the monetary flow and the cash flow required to maintain the brick and mortars over our heads, because there are consequences to people not having homes, and that's homelessness and crime and all sorts of stuff that occurs out of it.
And I think, sorry.
No, go, yeah.
And I think that also it just got. You think about the finance community. They looked at all the assets potentially that they could manipulate and master, and out of all the books you look at, you've got the mortgage, which is your safest asset. That's the lowest risk of that ever going into default. Obviously, depending if it's like a low income family and all that kind of stuff, but generally it is the safest asset possible. But then they've repackaged it, and then they've just ballooned it out of proportion. So it's almost the opposite way around now. It's where it was the safest asset possible, it's been re-engineered into this massive Ponzi scheme. And it's
not only that, we've got to look at as well, like it's not just isolative to the financiers. It's, if you look through the 70s and 80s, so previous to say 1980 in Australia, a standard double brick 3-bedroom house was your standard house, right? However, when you make a standard small house double brick, there's not a lot of fat on the bone, as per se, for the builders. And the builders want you to build as big a house as possible because they get materials cheaper. They can, all sorts of bits and pieces. A bigger house, you're less likely to notice flaws and all sorts of stuff.
Yep.
So the building industry increased regulation into itself to force you can't build a tiny house in Australia, really, at all, to be honest.
No.
You need to build an X amount of size, and it needs to have X, amount of everything. And it's all about the consumption. So the consumption of the family homes, not just purely in the financiers, it's in the builders, it's in everything. And it's all about the greed. It's all about growing everyone's industry and, big commission checks and things like that.
Land
it absolutely has. And it damages the problems with a home damage the family unit, and the family unit is what keeps our society connected to each other.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I like, everyone thinks about like what's happening in today's life, but I always try and have a look at what has been lost. You've literally got a generation that has been fucked, basically, because hasn't really fucked actually, because they've just had to stay at home. They can't afford the house. They've got this crappy job. They can't even hold down a job because everything's like the gig economy now. It's just a joke. So where is those decent long-term jobs that you can grab hold of? Where is that like land and house package which isn't going to completely destroy you? It's all gone, and it's just this it's a financial death trap that you're going to walk into.
Well, basically, yeah, especially when I got a comment the other day on my channel. Someone was saying, I was talking about interest-only loans coming up and how that's going to have an impact on the mortgage market, on the real estate market.
Yeah.
And they went, interest-only loans are only taken by investors. And quite honestly, that's just humbug. That's not true at all. There are so many people who have had to take interest-only loans, or who are in their 30s, for example, because that's how expensive places are. As you said, like even staying at home, it's expensive.
Yeah.
And this all comes down, I think, a lot of the time to realizing that, I understand being a CEO is a difficult job. However, CEOs play musical chairs far too often. And before in the 70s, you could have a business. Originally the banks would, they'd take the deposits from people and they'd give them 8% return on their money as a savings account or a termed deposit or whatever it may be.
Yep.
And then they'd give a business loan out to a business at like 12%. And the business, they'd assess the business, they'd assess the person running it, they'd ask the community, do you want this business? Is it usable? And if it all came back as yes, they'd give the money to the business owner. The business owner was accountable to the bank, and effectively accountable to the community for not wasting their money. So the business owner would be committed to making that exist long term. And if they had a bad year and didn't grow that year, no one cared. As long as they paid the bills, kept the lights on, paid all their employees, no one got upset at anyone not for growing 10%.
Yep.
But once we hit the 90s, everything had to grow 10% year on year. And CEOs who are taking, huge bonuses of like multi-million dollars, there's no long-term accountability. What's really interesting in Australia, I think, is if you look at a small business operator, if they make a mistake, they can go under real fast.
Yep.
A small business operator has to be on the ball, whereas a big company can make a lot of mistakes and it doesn't necessarily take them out because a corporation doesn't have to, put a roof over its head or anything like that. And it's all tax deductions anyway. But a small business operator has a much smaller amount of error. However, a small business operator also has to look at the face of the person that they're making sure that they put a paycheck to every week. They're a small business employee. That owner has to look at that employee every week and they know they're putting food on that family's table. Whereas in a corporation, the CEO doesn't see the families on the table that they're paying. And so there's no accountability for a lot of these things. And these are the overinflationatories because we've slowly been separated from our community. I'm not religious, and I don't mind whatever, I call them purple spaghetti monsters and I just use that term as a general term. But if someone is religious, there is benefit to that. And that is that A, community is always put forward very highly. And B, there's something bigger than themselves in the world. And I think in Australia, we kind of gave up. We were a very Christian country and we gave that up and we replaced, community with ourselves and our money. And we kind of, our highest value, which used to be working to do good in the world, got replaced with being famous.
Yeah. How many times, like how many people out there, like literally talk to their neighbours? So,
yeah, well, I live on a farm in the country, so I know all my neighbours.
But
in Sydney, no, you don't know anyone. Yeah,
no, you just go home, get into your house, sit indoors, switch on the TV.
But it's gotten so bad now. How many? He would be my challenge. How many kids actually face-to-face talk with their parents? I mean, they may talk to them over a Facebook message, or they may send them an SMS or a Snapchat or whatever it is they use nowadays. The cool kids.
Yeah,
they don't even talk. We don't even talk to our own family members.
Yeah,
and I've got a large background in communication. I understand how humans communicate a lot. And I often try and remind people that in a form of communication, only 11% of what we're communicating is communicated in our words alone. There's another 30-odd% that is communicated in our tonality, in our prosody, in all the vocal tones that we may have. And the rest of it is physical body language.
Yeah.
If you're ever in front of somebody, you get a lot more information of what they're trying to communicate. Quite frankly, words are really poor things to actually communicate with. If I say the word dog, you're thinking of a particular dog in your head. When I say that word, I'm thinking of a dog, and the chances of the two dogs being identical are very slim.
Yeah.
So words are very broad and rough as it is, and without the rest of the tonalities and physical language, we lose the communication, and therefore we end up, it's like eating GMOs, empty calories. We have empty communication, and I think that's one of the big things that kind of turned into all this is just things of trying to expand so much beyond what the value of them is that it's become hollow, as per se. And this reflects into the real estate. It's just prices of a $1 million house. It's like the brick and mortar and all that stuff's not worth it. It's just because it's wanted. There's no value in it anymore.
I showed this mate the other day, and I was like, "Hey, you're looking for a house? You're looking for about $1 million? Let's see what you can get in Florida." And literally, it was like this mansion. I was like, "Whoa!" Like I almost couldn't believe my eyes myself. I was like, "This is what $1 million can buy you." Over here, get a very standard 3-bedroom family house, something that really should only cost, I don't know, 400,000.
Yeah, yeah, and this is there's benefits to governments of maintaining these things as well. If you have a look, recently it was in Illinois where they just announced because America can't afford to pay its pensioners. The pensions in America for the fireys, the police, and those sorts of people are all paid by the state. Yep. Illinois is completely bankrupt, so they've decided that they're going to tax people, $2,500 if your house is worth $250,000 every year, additional land taxes, and they just tax these ever increasing. So as the price goes up and it becomes even more unaffordable for your average person, now they're introducing taxes that are going to make it even more unaffordable. And it's a really tricky discussion to have because, the Keynesian type economic principles that the world supposedly operates off are they're 100, 200 years old. Yeah. I constantly remind people. And the world since the 80s, it's like if you look at technology in the year 2000, if you couldn't use a computer, you could still use pen and paper. It was still accepted everywhere. You could still live in the year 2000 without having really much technical knowledge at all. I mean, home phones were only a standard thing through the 90s.
Yeah.
People always think we've had these forever, but we haven't. And nowadays, you can't pen and paper things. You can't cash things anymore. You have to be technologically capable in the modern day. And, it's like I say to most people, you want to see how hard it is to get off technology nowadays, go from a smartphone back to a, 2010 dumb phone, as per se, and see how much stuff you can't do anymore that you absolutely rely on. Like we all rely on, most people rely on Google Maps or Waze. And that's because none of us have a UBD in the back of the car anymore.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, it was shit when you was trying to remember your way home and stuff though. That was a nightmare.
Yeah, that's it. But this is how much the world has changed. And these technological, technology is a great thing. However, we've never really stopped and asked the consequences of this. And as the world economies start to kind of merge into each other, it's like Apple's owned by America, but everything's manufactured in China. So whose GDP should it go on to? And this discussion of this world kind of finger in every pie thing comes back to the real estate, because originally it was the Australians that were dealing with the Australian real estate market. But, after, I think it's the White Australia policy after the Vietnam War that kind of got dissolved effectively, and we started having huge immigration from Asia, all of a sudden we opened ourselves up to international markets. So anything we do in regards to real estate isn't just isolated to Australia. I mean, as Australians can't afford property, we may not be able to afford it, but, China can come in and buy it,
yeah.
And so it's very hard. I think, the real estate market has declined. How much? It's really hard to say because, real estate agents don't want to tell you that it's going down because they make commission. They want you to put your house on the market. They want you to think that it's a good market. They're a salesperson.
Yeah.
So they're not going to be honest about it. At the end of the day, anyone who deals with high-end sales in that regards knows how to fidget figures. Yeah. So, if a house sells for less, they'll just say that the sticker price was less. So it looks like they're not taking as much of a defeat as they really were. Then we've got to factor into how much real estate's being brought from overseas. And I don't think anyone's really been honest about how much real estate Asia actually owns. It's like no one really even understands our energy. In Australia, the majority of Australian gas is owned by Gazprom, which is a Russian company.
Yeah.
And the reason why we pay such high rates from AGL is because AGL has a shorter term lease on the gas than Gazprom does from Russia.
Yeah.
And it's like we're not honest about who owns us and who actually owns the deeds to everything in this country.
It gets me wound up because, even though I'm obviously you can tell I'm from the UK, but this country should be punching so much harder for what it's got. It's got brilliant positioning where you think on the map you've got all emerging markets all on their doorstep. We've got best resources. Every single resource, probably even maybe you're missing a bit of oil. I think there's a bit of oil in Australia, but pretty much everything else that you could ever want is in Australia. You just need to take it out of the ground and you need to build it.
We did that through the 80s and the 90s, the mining boom. And this is the joke. We're being told that Australia's broke. We can't afford to have welfare and everything else, which is, it's bogus. When you really, when people complain about Medicare, I remind them it's like the total cost of the country of Medicare is something like $33 billion. That might sound like a lot, but when you actually go see what everything else costs, $33 billion to make sure no one goes without healthcare is incredibly cheap. The mining boom happened, and if you look through the corporations like the Pasmencos and all of those type of companies, Blue Scope Steel and all these guys, they pay almost no tax. So that not only did they pull everything out of the ground, never to be replaced again, they paid no tax on it. The Australian public made nothing on it.
Yeah.
And then they lobby to protect themselves. So the money that they earned from mining went to protecting the mining companies, not to the Australian public.
Yep.
That's been, look at the Reinhardt fortune came from the 90s and the 2000s of mining. And you're right, we had everything. And another thing, if we look at it, it's like our food basins, all of our food in Australia is some of the most world-class leading food. The only people who beat us in food, really, possibly is New Zealand, because they have no GMOs and they don't use Monsanto pesticides, which are all proven to be highly toxic. We do, unfortunately. And even if you don't use them, it gets blown onto your farm from the next door farm. So Australia is one of the best food producers. And what do? We ship everything we ship all of our Wagyu beef over to Japan. We ship all of our food over to China. And then we buy back their food. And when we chemically test it, there's melamine, like children's plastic dishes are inside of food that we're importing from China and putting on our shelves.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, so it's like we as a country, it's that hollow thing, that we have all the value and we sell it off for the money, and then we import this really nutritionally useless food that comes from waterways. And there's a reason why China's buying our food, because it's better than what they produce, because they've destroyed their environment. And but then you get into the environmental thing and you have a look, it's like the beef farmers are getting, you guys are not carbon neutral, but the beef farmers are carbon neutral. They do a lot of brilliant work, and yet the Queensland government's lobbying to steal the beef farmers' land. Yeah. It's like, what are you doing that for? They're good people. They're farmers. And even our farming, we don't protect our farmers in this country like we used to.
Yeah.
Australians were always, when I was growing up traveling around the world, and I've seen all the world, I was always amazed that Australians were always highly regarded, because if you stuck an Australian in a situation, they were like the worldwide MacGyver. Everyone thought an Australian can make something happen with almost nothing. Australians were ingenious. We've got so many patents that aren't even available because big companies release them. It's like the guy who invented the diamond spray onto glasses that meant your glasses would never scratch their entire life. Bought up by a glass company because that would stop people from replacing their reading glasses every 2 years, and that's not economically viable. But an Australian invented that. So many inventions that we've done. We were always known as these amazing people, and I think we've lost that. In the pursuit of money, because we used to have a pursuit of community and, get through it. The old Aussie farmer and the outback farmer, that was our legacy. And then we sold the legacy off and China bought up the farms, and it's happening again and again.
Yeah. I spoke to, I think it was a guy at a barbecue, and it sort of made me laugh, but I think there is a little bit of truth to this. He goes, do you know what? There's this game plan. What we're doing is we just let the politicians do what they want to do. They can sell off all the land to China and whatever else. And then what's going to happen is you're going to get a nationalist that's going to come in, and he's going to just go up yours to everyone. And then it's all going to be Australia's again.
Quite possibly. But the problem is like, if you have a look at, I'm not sure if it's Adani or there's another one, the name, but the company that bought up the Barrier Reef to oil drill on the Barrier Reef. The problem is in that process, granted, we could have a national come back and take it all back again. They're doing that in South Africa. But when that happens, there's going to be bloodshed. The environment is never going to be the same as it was before. This is one of the things, like, I don't, whoever buys it is going to buy it. I understand how the world works. At the end of the day, though, it's like, Australia is a pristine country. If you haven't traveled around Australia, you really need to go travel through the outback, and you realize how pristine this country is. And when you travel through other places in the world, you realize that it's a lot more polluted. It's not as pristine. And those countries got that way from their choices of behavior because, for example, China doesn't take environmental protection very importantly. Money is more important than environmental protection in China. And in Australia, environmental protection was higher than money. But nowadays, not so sure, really not so sure.
Yeah, I've never seen any blue in the Thames River.
That's it, I mean, and people forget, like, we've made this mistake before. People really do forget that the Sydney Harbour, which looks quite blue nowadays, in the 70s was toxic. It was really dangerous in the 70s because of all the pollution that was dumped into the Sydney Harbour, and they had to clean the harbour out a lot. They did a lot of dredging, a lot of rehabilitation of the harbour, a lot of new laws that prevented things from happening in the harbour, and it took 20, 30 years to recover, and it's not fully recovered yet.
Yeah.
But it took a long time to recover. So it's not like we haven't already made these mistakes. And we're making them again because we don't talk about history. It's like you talk to your average kid, they can tell you the history of the United States and how, Declaration of Independence and the war against the English and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But when you start to ask them about the history of Australia, no one knows. And I'll give you an example that I'm not a fan of feminists, but I always laugh because the first women to get a vote in the world were the WA women. And it was back in I think it was 1898, somewhere in there, they started to do this. And in the turn of the century, the WA women were given the vote. And when the country was being formed in the Constitution, and they were deciding whether, it was called West Australia back then, not Western Australia, and they were deciding whether West Australia was going to become part of the Commonwealth or not, it was the Australian women that were given a vote. And the Australian women were the ones who made the decision to join the Commonwealth. Now, if they had not many people realize it, but I think it was Teddy Roosevelt was actually in WA trying to make WA an American state, like, America Samoa and all those types of things. We almost lost WA to America. And it was the Australian women who voted to protect the country. And it's like, all these women's rights and everything. We don't even talk about the women who exercise their rights for the care of our entire country, and that's Australian history right there, and the average person doesn't know about these things. It doesn't even understand, the whole Aboriginals were actually able to vote up before we made the Constitution, because Aboriginal males over the age of 21 were considered to be British subjects, and they were actually allowed to vote. We wrote the Constitution. They weren't allowed to vote until, the 1960s again, another 60-something years where they were banned voting, and then we fixed it again. And no one knows any of the history of Australia outside of, the Ned Kelly story. That seems to be the only old Australia story. Everyone knows about Captain Cook and Ned Kelly. That's it.
Yeah.
And even immigration, if you look at the Eureka Stockade and the gold rush through Eureka, the Chinese came in and people got sick of them and they threw them out and they all went to South Australia and then they all snuck back into Victoria again. So we've had immigration issues with Chinese previously.
Yeah.
The
immigration
issues we face now, we have faced previously in this country. And by not talking about what we did historically and how that turned out, we're going to make the same mistake over and over again.
Definitely. Must be one of the things I noticed with the setup of Australia. It does give you this like hint of when all the colonialists just settled in. They're trying to create their farmland and give it out to their mates and everything else. I realised very quickly that location is everything. Unless you've got a port and a position where you can actually bring in your goods in and out, your land is pretty much worthless unless you're next to one of those harbour points.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, if you actually think about it, Australia came out and it was a couple of rich people who owned everything.
Yeah.
And a slave class, and and then the Aboriginals didn't even really exist for a long time.
Yeah.
I don't think it's really changed much. If you really look at the settlers, there were a couple of very wealthy people who, as you said, established the ports, did all the trading through the maritime trading. Everyone else just kind of survived on the land. Yeah. But it's the same game nowadays. You've got a couple of politicians doing the trading, and everyone else is just trying to survive. And it hasn't changed much really. We still have quite a slave class, and I think you start to see that. When you were mentioning before the Royal Commission. The Royal Commission, it's like we're doing this investigation into the banks, but it's a really odd thing to be doing this Royal Commission, because at the end of the day, what are you going to do? If you fine them, they're going to change their ledgers and just print money for nothing, and they'll just pump it out and they'll pay the fine. So fining them doesn't really work.
Yeah.
If you collapse them, then the faith in the Australian government disappears, and so the Australian government's not going to let that occur. So when they go bankrupt, the only thing is for them to do is to stick their hands into our deposits in our superannuation funds and steal more wealth from the middle class.
Yeah.
And this is why we had bushrangers, because the upper class kept the lower class low, and the bushrangers were fighting to get the lower class to move up into the middle class.
Yeah.
And it's an ironic thing. It's like everyone's trying to be rich, but realistically, you talk to your average person, I think, and they'll just say, if I could pay all my bills, which is the family home, pay the bills, make sure the kids are okay, and have enough money to go to a restaurant and not worry about what something costs in the menu, I'm doing okay. The middle class is a really important thing. The middle class is what creates social stability.
Yeah.
If you look at the homicide rates, the whole gun argument and Port Arthur thing, I did a whole episode on this, but homicide rates haven't got to do anything to do with guns. Homicide rates have to do with bad economic policies. When you have bad economic policies and people are at risk because their jobs aren't secure, of losing their homes or not being able to feed themselves, the two basic things we have to be able to do, which are all family unit things, then typically the homicide rate goes up. And, most of the time it's one spouse pulling a knife out of the kitchen and stabbing the other spouse. But you can always see an economic stress on that family typically when that occurs. So it's like, by destroying the middle class, we're doing some real danger to this country. We're making it unsafe. And that's what used to make it safe, was that we had a very large middle class. That's what made Australia so good in the 70s, 80s and 90s. The middle class thrived in Australia. As you said, one person could work, mum could stay at home, or vice versa, it doesn't matter. The kids came home to a human being. They were held accountable by a human being. They were taught by a human being, not by Google and YouTube like they are nowadays.
Yeah. And one thing I noticed is about especially the UK is it's probably the ultimate sort of classed society of the the working class, middle class, upper class. Australia doesn't necessarily have that in their accents. It's, I guess, like even if you hear the politicians in Australia, you don't. They all sound like they're from the outback kind of thing. They've got a little bit of a twang to them, whereas with the politicians in the UK, they all sound like barristers and everything else, and you're like, oh.
No, our politicians just sound like accountants and lawyers, to be honest. But
really?
You're right. We don't. But well, we're only 200 years old. You know,
Yeah.
everyone thinks Australia is like established. It's 200 years old. That's nothing.
Yeah.
When I spent my time in England, I was walking around places that were, 2,000-3,000 years old. I've visited Stonehenge, which granted is not what it was originally. It's been messed with 100 times. But I've walked around the Roman baths. I've seen the old castles and things. I stood in front of the knights' bits and pieces, and they're all 1,000 to 2,000 years old. We're 200 years old here.
Yeah.
Australian history is so new, and we don't really have much in this country outside of the Aboriginal stuff. We have nothing in this country of real historical value. It's definitely something. I think that's why we don't have the separation of the classes, because there's just very little time that anyone's really been here. It's a speck on human history.
It takes a while to sort of set in. All right, so I know, like, in the media that we're getting right now, it sounds like even like Core Logic came out recently to say that the housing market has done a little bit of a turn. It's gone down by about 4% in the last year in Sydney, and I guess like we're looking at a stage now where we've had this. The rise has continued since, I don't know, the 80s, as we've put it, and it's never abated until really, like, there's been a couple of little murmurs in the past, but really now I feel like we're on the edge of a cliff now in terms of this asset pump.
Well, it's growing 10% almost every year from like 2005.
Gravity
onwards,
is having its effect now, isn't it? And
well, an asset can only go up in value providing the incomes of the people can support that asset value.
Yeah.
And we're at 60% of your income to the mortgage. We're hitting that peak. Yeah, we're absolutely hitting that peak.
Yeah.
But the question is do we let, is money going to come in from overseas to buy us up?
Yeah.
Because we're not insulated. This is one of the problems. So, when people go, it's turned down 4%. And then again, economics, like if we're honest about economics, is not really what is really happening in economics doesn't really affect economics. It's the speculation of the market that affects economics. And this 4% drop's freaking everyone out.
So how do you see this all panning out? Because I'm thinking to myself, all right, so the housing market is really going for a turn. I think to myself, okay, well, it's got to come back to like the standard of like 4 times average household income. It's got to get in that range. And I'm thinking, okay, well, mathematically, it's got to go down by almost 50%, which is like a shocker. If you speak to anyone, there's no way can something go down by a 50%. But then on top of that, I know that the interest rates are so low, and then basically there's all these treasuries that need to be dumped into the market. Everyone's getting scared about Italy bonds. There's sovereign crisis that's about to happen, and at a sovereign level, you're going to have this double whammy effect in Australia. Basically, the gravity of this Ponzi pump is going to start cracking, and then just at the time when that's falling, the interest rates are just going to go basically crazy, and then then what are people going to do? You've got the double whammy effect. And
well, then you get the separation between the lower, then the middle class disappears. The rich buy, like when the asset value goes down, rich will buy it up, and the poor won't be able to. Poor will become middle class, will either have to rent or become rich.
I can't like for some reason. I know that's sort of in my head. That's my theory. I'm thinking that's almost that's the most likely situation that's going to happen for Australia. But then in my day-to-day living, I'm thinking to myself, can that really happen? It's like people, so many people are going to be literally wiped out. Yeah,
but I think because we're in, as I mentioned earlier, that globalization is understanding we're not in insular economics anymore. The globalization is a really important thing. We look at Tokyo, for example. Mortgages are multi-generational in Tokyo. It's not one you don't pay it in a generation. You pay it over 2 or 3 generations in Tokyo. China, you always have the grandparents living with you. In Australia, as you said, we've got it very well. A single family unit lives in a home, and you don't necessarily have your elders with you. But that may not be a good thing. Maybe we do I mean, I think there could be a lot of benefit to this as, you know, as this contraction occurs, maybe people will have to move their parents into the house, and then the kids are going to have someone around when they get home. There's actually some weird benefits that may actually occur. And Australians have been buying a lot of crap off Amazon and eBay for a long time, like a good 10 years, been wasting a lot of money. And maybe it's time that, you know, everyone got a bit of a shake up and started to think about what they're actually spending their money on. Maybe we'll return to investing into things rather than just buying crap.
What's your opinion of like the Royal Commission? And like, I think this is coming from one side, but they're saying it's too dangerous. It's going to have a negative effect on the financial stability. What's your opinion of that news coming out?
I think we need to be careful, because when you have crooks investigating crooks, no truth's going to come out of it, right? It's just the baseline of it, you know. The Australian government is very hard to trust these people, and this is just based off things like robo-debt and things like that, where they don't validate any debt. I think it's a giant show. I think the information that's coming out is good that people see it. I think a lot of people have had normalcy bias for a long time, and you know, it's amazing how much trust people give to companies and give them authority. You know, like, oh well, the Commonwealth Bank. It's like, Commonwealth Bank's a private company, effectively.
Yeah,
you know, no one really cares. I think seeing these stories come out is going to make people more weary of the banks. I think one of the problems is Australians have been stupid with their money, really, really stupid. They've overfinanced, you know, they've done all sorts of crazy crap. It's like the car loans is the next, you know, subprime mortgage. That's a massive one for me.
I'm driving around in a crappy car, looking around the streets thinking, I don't earn too bad, but why has everybody got all these nice flash cars? How are they doing it?
Well, they're doing it with 5 years worth of debt, you know,
okay.
and then it's like, you look at that. So someone had, you know, they buy a car, they get 5 years worth of debt, and they're not looking forward. Australians haven't been thinking forward. So that person gets that cheap auto loan. You know, Toyota offers, you know, 0% equivalent interest rates. You know, maybe it's like 1 or 2% real rate. They buy that car. Now for 5 years, it's like every employer wants someone who has a mortgage and loans, because they're going to turn up to work tomorrow.
Yeah.
Now, when you know they're so in debt that they have to turn up, and we have a casualization of the workforce going on, where full-time employees are becoming casual employees. I don't care what anyone says, that's happening. You talk to people in the world, in this country, we're casualizing a lot of our workforce.
Yeah.
At that point, people can't take time off for sick leave. They can't take time off to care for their family or whatever else that we used to be able to do. And then what happens there? Well, you just end up having a bust of this financial value. Everything gets forfeited, and let's really look at the debt recovery laws since the Howard days have been disgusting. Back in the 70s and 80s and Keating and Hawke days, before debt recovery got abused, you would have the sheriff turn up on your door, because someone from the bank would take the sheriff a whole bunch of paperwork of all this proof that you owed the money. They'd audit the account, and they go, Mr. Sheriff, we've checked this account. Here is the signed audit by a banker. You know, can you please go say that this recovery has to be done? And the sheriff would turn up and recover. But nowadays, you know, they just sell your debt to a debt collector, and they harass you until you pay it.
Oh, yeah.
And when you talk to people who challenge the debt collectors don't have any record. They're just told, person Bob owes this much, and that's it. And when they fail, or if they fail, they hand the debt back to the company, and it gets given out to a different debt collector. And so technically you could have 3 or 4 debt collectors who have called you over the same amount of money without ever receiving any paperwork.
Yeah.
And when you actually look at the letters that debt collectors send out, there's no return address on the back, which then makes you question the validity of the mail and how honest all of this stuff is. They always want to talk to you on the phone rather than putting anything in writing, because they know that there's dodgy things going on in this industry. So the problem is the politicians are allowing, through their debt collection laws and other things, they're allowing these horrible behaviors. It's not going to be long till thugs turn up on people's door, and it will be legal for them.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, the country, everyone's been borrowing for so long, at some point it's going to have to, you know, and at that point where it deflates, the worst of the debt will have people knocking on doors. The small debt will just get written off into taxes. You know, but I think at the end of the day, the Royal Commission is giving people the insight into, I don't think it's going to do much good now, but I think by the time something goes wrong and we need to rebuild the system and the country's actually willing to do something that's good for the country, I think it may be useful then.
I think the best thing is that, well, if it was ever possible, is have a Royal Commission on the actual government itself and how it interacts with the banks, how it interacts with the land release, all those factors.
Oh, that will never happen. I'll give you a really interesting. I'll give you the shortest version I can. So, in the Constitution, the government is called the Government of the Commonwealth of Australia. That's what it is written as in the original 1901 Constitution stamped by the Queen.
Yeah.
Nowadays, we have this thing called the Australian government. If you were to actually ask the government to prove that the thing called the Australian government is completely lawfully the government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and it did a name change, they don't provide that very simply. And the thing about law is supposed to be easy. It's like I think Napoleon, there's a couple of empires that have done it well, but Napoleon did it really well when he had all of his lawyers turn up, and he basically wanted to have all law for the country and his empire that was available in a book that you could fit in your pocket.
Yeah.
And then that way everyone knew what the law was. You could pull the book out and read it, and that's the law. And they distilled all the laws down to a book size.
And that was education. Education was to inform the people of the law as well. It doesn't. How much does the law get taught at school nowadays? Nothing.
Very, very, very little. They teach business studies. They don't teach law. Yeah. So, and then on top of that, then we have legislation. And as I was saying to you earlier, it's like you end up with the Constitution says you have right to free travel across the state. Then you get RBTs, random breath testing, which stops you from having free travel across the state. And then we get to this point where you go, well, drunk drivers are bad, so we'll let that one slide. And then we get legislation that comes on top of that becomes more and more vague off the Constitution. And until enough people come back and handle all the way back to the High Court of Australia, but the High Court of Australia is owned by the Australian government effectively. So if the Australian government is not the de jure government of the country, and I'm not sure, I'm not a high enough educated person. However, I think that the question is the government that we have today the same as the government we used to have? I think that should be a pretty easy to answer question. Like, it shouldn't be a hard question to answer for anyone in the country. Any citizen should be able to find that information pretty easily. If they aren't the de jure government, then it's all up for question, And there's a lot of things like this that you could question. Like, originally, judges had to have a sworn affidavit to the Queen when they sat in court, and they have to sit down and they have to have a sworn affidavit. And they don't have that. They don't carry that on them nowadays. So does that mean every judge who is ultimately affording a mistrial by turning up and not having that piece of paper? That's a hard discussion to have with anyone because no one wants to talk about it. And even if you look at the Constitution, it says that your inalienable rights cannot be removed unless it's 2 magistrates or a jury of 12 peers. And family court has 1 magistrate down. So if you have a baby with somebody else, 1 magistrate can say you're going to pay money for the next 18 years, which violates the Constitution. So there's a lot of questions about the government. And I'll give you another one. For example, not the Royal Commission. What was it? I can't even remember what it's called. There was an inquiry. I can't remember what it used to be called, but it's like a grand inquiry. And basically, if someone committed a crime and they didn't get done with it, you could take it to this, Royal Commission grand inquiry type thing, and they would have a look. You remember what it was called?
Tribunal. I'm just making stuff up.
No. Yeah, I can't remember. I really wish I could remember, but nonetheless, for example, that existed. This Grand Inquisition where you could basically go and they would go see if the crime was committed. Now, there's a rule in Australian politics that says that you cannot become Prime Minister if you have one of these inquiries outstanding on you. Now, Julia Gillard had one of these inquiries outstanding on her before she became Prime Minister, when she took over from Kevin Rudd. And they shut the court down before she became Prime Minister so she could become Prime Minister.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of these questions, that you got to look at over and over again. It's the old Tony Abbott dual citizenship. Not allowed to have dual citizenship as the Prime Minister of Australia. It's written clearly in the law, but that question never really got answered. And no one goes back into the history and says, well, what happened there? There's a lot of questionable bits and pieces. I always joke and say the Prime Minister of Australia should live on, twice whatever Newstart is. Whatever unemployment benefits are, give them twice that, and then they should live on that, because ultimately they can have their hire cars and everything else on a company credit card, so they can do their job. Yeah. But if we were to pay people very little to do the job, then maybe they would be doing the job more out of the value that they want the country to be great rather than earning money. Because I look at someone like, what's his name, Malcolm Turncoat, I call him. Yeah. Turncoat is a Goldman Sachs banker. Marcon from England, from France, he's another banker again. And it's like,
Bank.
We have a banking royal commission, but ultimately we have a guy who's got a history of finance. Ultimately, Malcolm Turnbull ran Aussie Email. What happened? They're a tech company. What happened to them? They died. And he's handling our NBN. It's gone from $44 billion for the whole service of 93% of the country to $87 billion, and we're going to have to replace it in 3 years rather than 10 years.
Yeah.
So the guy who ran a tech company screwed up our tech infrastructure.
Yeah.
It's just there's so many questions you can throw at the government. But if you throw these things, people go, oh, you're unpatriotic, or the government really comes heavy-handed after you. You start questioning some of these things. You got to realize, like, the ATO can garnish your wages with no evidence.
Yeah.
You can't. In all fairness, there is no ability in this country to square up against the government. Kind of Daryl Kerrigan, that was his name, Dale Kerrigan or whatever it was, the castle guy. You can't really square up like that the same way you used to be able to 30 years ago.
It's interesting how you mentioned about that. Like, there's always the unseen sort of thing. Everyone's looking at the headline of like CBA getting fined 700 billion for not surveying all of its accounts with the anti-money laundering, but hold on a minute here. Why are we watching everybody's accounts? Like, is there a freedom problem here? Why is everybody being watched? Like,
well, yeah. So it's the lack of trust.
Yeah.
See, this is one of the degradations of the Australian society. Is we originally had trust. Some people you didn't always trust, right? But when you have a community, a small town, if you've ever lived in a small town, you know who you can trust and you know who you can't trust.
Yeah.
And that's because small towns talk to their neighbors. They interact with each other. They give each other a lift home when they're drunk or whatever. So that no one drives drunk or whatever.
Yeah.
There is trust, and to have trust, you have to have physiological interaction. You can't just have this over the internet thing, because you're only getting 11% of the communication over these microwaves in our pocket we talk on all the time.
Yeah.
And so trust is being lost. You notice it a lot in Sydney when if I have to travel into the city. I just noticed no one says hello. I mean, I'm not out in the way country, but I'm far enough out that people say hello. They smile. I don't know everyone's name or
sound like Crocodile Dundee.
I can recognize people in my local area, and we'll just know of each other, and we'll just be human. If a little old lady falls over in my town, 5 people will stop their day to go pick her up. And when they get back to work and someone says, "Why are you late from lunch?" they'll go, "A little old lady fell over," and the boss goes, "Oh, is Mary okay?" It's not, well, you're going to get sacked half an hour's pay or whatever. We're going to dock you. It's, hey, is Mary okay? Because that trust in the community is there.
Yeah.
And that really gets lost in the faceless. I never realized how dangerous cities are to the health of human beings until I left one for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And, I travel back to the city. I mean, who knows? I think I noticed the amount of EMF radiation. I think I noticed the amount of UV lights, and it does play an impact on you. I mean, when you live out of it, and it's very quiet where I live. There's not a lot of street lights. It's very quiet, peaceful. Wi-Fi. We don't have many towers, cell phone towers where we are. But you go into somewhere where they have all that stuff, and you feel stressed.
Yeah.
It's when someone comes into the town and starts beeping their horn, we know they're a blow-in, not from town, because they're beeping their horn. Because the only reason people who are local beep their horn is to wait for someone to say hello. They beep and they're like, "Hi." Whereas if someone's beeping their horn going, no, they're from the city, and cities are a place where people are wound up, but as everyone packs on top of each other. And this turns into the multiculturalism thing too. And I'm not judging one culture to be right or one culture to be wrong. That's not my choice. Everyone needs to decide what they agree or disagree with. But every culture around the world, like, human beings are fascinating creatures. We have so many infinite values. We're like this infinite creativity being. And we express ourselves in infinite ways. And we all have general ways of expressing ourselves. Like in the West, we can drink alcohol and we have, gay marriage. In the East, you can't do those things, but you're allowed to have slaves and 7 wives, right?
Yeah.
And so those are 2 very different values. In Saudi Arabia, they'll throw you off a building for being gay.
Yeah.
In Australia, you can marry each other. And personally, I don't care less. I don't think anyone should be getting involved in someone's personal business. If someone wants to be gay, well, that's their personal business. I don't care. If they want to express their love that way, fine. Being married is just a legal obligation to each other, really. It's just a lawful piece of paper saying you're financially bound to each other effectively.
Yeah.
So when we look at this multiculturalism, and you try and shovel a whole heap of immigration and different cultures into a very small footprint, whose values are the ones that come out on top? Because as much as I know snowflakes like to say, "Oh, everyone's feelings are important," they're not. It's how it is. Not everyone's importance matter. Not everyone's feelings matter, and not everyone's feelings are important to everyone else's perspective.
Yeah.
And so you end up with these. It's like the old thing. It's like an Islamic church blasts a bell at 5 a.m. Now that might be. You hear that sound at 5 a.m. and you're Islamic. You feel pride. You feel happiness because it's your God call effectively, you know, like that's a positive feeling for you. But if that's not your value, then you feel fear, you know, and you might feel that this alien thing's happening around you. Really, it's just another human being expressing themselves differently. That's the truth. Two human beings who express themselves differently. But you get this like stress that occurs. And I think that's really a problem when you look at the city structures at the moment too.
Do you know, I think one of the classic things about all this immigration is the fact that it all comes down to one thing. Was anybody asked, all of this mass migration, was anybody asked, oh, by the way, do you want your city to double every, I don't know, 20 years? Does it, like, anybody was asked any of these questions? Do you want all these different communities, all these different cultures moving into your area? Does anybody vote for that?
No. But ironically, if you think back to it, Australians right now, I was really thinking about this a couple of days before this time. I thought, I've got to think about this for the interview. You go back to the Aboriginal. Did they ever ask Cook to land and dump off and have everything that happened?
True.
And so now we're facing that. Karmically, Australians are facing how we started is what we're facing now.
Yeah.
And I think it's, to use lack of a better term, karma is a good way of looking at it, because what goes around has come around.
Yeah.
And I think that we really need to have a hard look. And this is why I talk about multiculturalism so much on my show, is because, not because I'm judging any culture to be right or wrong or whatever else, like just all their expression. However, we really need to actually face this. We need to deal with it. It needs to be, we can't just sweep this one under the carpet, because all that's going to happen is, given birth rates of Australians is, was it 1.8 or 1.9 at the moment, I think? Yeah. Australia's culture is going to be bred away in 50 years because the typical Islamic immigrant has a breeding rate of 8 to 1. Yeah. And we have 1.8 to 1. And it's not judging anyone. That's just pure maths, you know? And as you said at the very beginning, the family, like this comes back to houses and families, you know, people, if they're not secure about their job, you know, it's the old idiocracy type start. It's like, oh, the world's kind of unstable. We're not going to breed any kids. It's like, intelligent people don't breed when they're stressing the world.
Yeah.
But, you know, and I'm saying this as a separate, I'm not judging a religion for being smart or stupid or anything, but dumb people breed all the time. This is a problem. Easily manipulated people breed constantly. You know, and bread and circuses. It's like, just give people some food, whether it be McDonald's, whatever. It could be the crappiest stuff in the world, and give them some entertainment, the football, the cricket. You know, one of the saddest things to me, and I love sport. I grew up playing sport, but one of the saddest things to me is every time I hear a cricket scandal, everyone talks about it. And I'm so over it. It's like people think the Australian cricket team aren't professional athletes who take every advantage they can, and some they're not supposed to. And it's like that will hit the news for weeks on end. But when we're talking about what we're talking about, you and I at the moment, that discussion's hard to get anyone to even walk away with and have again.
Well, I don't actually watch any sport, so I'm stuck for any conversation when it's like blokes in a pub. But I'll find a quick way to get out of it. I'll talk about like things that are happening during the day and stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, but it goes for weeks in the news. If someone tampers with the ball in the cricket team, that will be talked about for like 3 weeks on the news, radio and TV.
I worked out like after probably, I don't know, maybe about 10 or 5 years ago that sport is a distraction. That's really what it's there for. Like the actual
circuses. It's a circus, yeah.
The beauty of sport or a club is like something that's what we're going back to is community. It's like focusing on the community, local players, playing for the community, having something to support, being proud of your area and all that kind of stuff, and having some roots into that town. But sport hasn't really become that. It's become this multinational bloody cesspit of corporations and billionaires and grotesque bloody footballers who do anything with it's a joke.
What happened with the Olympics? Once the Olympics, you weren't allowed to be a professional athlete and join the Olympics. But nowadays, once the dream team of 1992 and the NBA guys played, that was it. You could be a professional in the Olympics.
Yeah.
And then look at football. I'm not a fan of rugby league, but I mean, it's a sport that Australia plays. And if you look at the rugby league players, when the sport was at its greatest, according to their own fans, is typically through the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And those guys had day jobs and they played on the weekend. And that was when the sport was the best, according to the fans. Yeah. And nowadays we have professional athletes and there's just nothing but scandals. We throw huge amounts of money at people who run into each other like gladiators, and then they make bad decisions in their personal lives with who they sleep with and what they do and what they intake into their bodies.
Yeah.
And then we get upset with them. And you're like, that person's job is to run into a brick wall effectively over and over again, and you expect them to make good life choices just because you paid them a lot of money, you know? As you said, it's a circus.
Yeah.
The drama cycle, it kills us, man, in the world. The drama cycle kills us.
There's nothing better than just like seeing some, like, I don't know, somebody part of your community trying to really like work for the team and trying to be part of the team, and he won't be bought out by anybody else. He won't be sold to another club. Like, there's pride and passion there. That's really what sport's all about. But there's nothing now. It's bloody whatever. Everybody's going into sport now. It doesn't really matter who you are. There is no sense of community. It's a waste of time, in my eyes, anyway.
In a faceless world where you can delete your Facebook and start up a fresh account, there is no incentive for accountability anymore. What you're talking about is long-term accountability to a community.
Yeah.
You know, nowadays it's like, that doesn't exist. I don't think the millennials actually know what true accountability and long-term actually means. You know, if you said to a millennial, what does long-term mean? They'll probably give you an answer, but I don't actually know if they'd have a true understanding. I'm sure there are a couple of them out there, don't get me wrong. But I don't think the average millennial actually understands what doing something long-term is. And, you know, this is one of the things I'm trying to put together a show at the moment called The Republic of Humbug, where I want to talk about how we make Australia great again, right? Yep. And one of the things I kind of propose to people and I always throw out there is voting, right? Democracy is mob rule, if we're honest about it, right?
Yep.
Now, your average mob, you know, dweller watches a lot of TV and consumes a lot of Facebook, social media, you know, like targeted social media. So it's very easy for someone with money to unconsciously manipulate them into what they want them to think.
Use Cambridge Analytica.
Liberal Party's great because I've seen the ads, right?
Yeah.
You know, that's your average mob dweller. Now, and I have the same problem with millennials having so much media time as well. And I'm not just targeting millennials, but just I think they're the first young generation who's been able to get their faces in front of the world. You know, Gen Y they weren't really able to get their faces in front of the world. And before that, the boomers, when they were of that young age, before their 20s, they didn't ever have that opportunity.
Yeah.
So the millennials are the first ones with this opportunity. But the problem is, it's like what's her name? Yvette, whatever her name is, out at Orange, the Nationals candidate that's up there. She's like 21 years old.
Right.
And it's like, when we go to the polls, you know, not everyone is a good vote. You know, not everyone votes for what's best for the country. Some people just vote what's best for themselves. And the problem is they don't have anything to lose. It's, you know, I always put this idea out there. It's like, before you're allowed to vote, what if you had to either have A, a family, right? B, a property, or C, a business, right? You had to have one of those three. It could be any one. You could have all three. But you had to have one of those three before you voted. And what that would ensure, and maybe, you know, it needs a modification or whatever else, I'd love to hear anyone's ideas. But what that would ensure is that when you go to vote, you have something to lose.
Yeah.
Because when a 21-year-old who lives at home, who has a casual job, you know, just because that's how society's turned out, has no family because they don't talk to their family.
Yeah.
When they go to vote, what have they got to lose if they make a bad choice?
Do you know what? You've said something perfect there. I think it's been said in old ancient Rome or somewhere else. I can't remember where it was exactly. But in the old days, the ones who had to fight were the ones for the country were the ones who had the most to lose. So you'd have the kings at the front of the army, and then you'd have all their lords and all those kind of people, the people that had the most to lose, and then everybody else afterwards. You can't see Reinhardt fight for us or anything like that.
She'll be hiding out the back like Gollum in a cave with the magic ring. My precious.
So yeah, and I just like, you think about military nowadays, it's a joke.
Well, think about companies. CEOs are gone in 2 years every time. See, we come back. This whole discussion has come back over and over again to values, trust, and family. It just keeps coming back to that.
Yep.
You know, it's like the property market. No one trusts the economy to do what it's going to do. You know, we're not protecting our families. If you think about, you know, immigration, there's no trust. It's like we bring these cultures in, and because we're not assimilate, we don't even know what Australian is. We used to have this picture of, if you say, what is an Australian 20 years ago, you've got an Akubra hat, you know, a flannelette shirt, a pair of jeans, a ute, and a cattle dog in the back, and a farm. That's, I think, you know, almost Crocodile Dundee, if you ask most people what Australian is. There was some identity there. But if you ask the same question today, we don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
And so everyone's not knowing what to trust. And then our leaders don't have any fortitude. They're not committed. You know, they're just going to run and bail. It's like they always do. And CEOs are the same. When you enter a business, you know, I don't care what anyone says. A business everyone in a corporation will do what the CEO holds them accountable for. You know, when a CEO with some fortitude and some integrity takes over a company, says, no, you know, I'm not going to accept you lying or cheating or whatever else, and we get into that, then we get some good results out of it. Company delivers a brilliant service. You know, this has happened. Think about how bad telecom used to be. Everyone's like, well, Telstra stuff. It's like, hey, do you remember how bad telecom used to be originally in the 70s and 80s? They were horrible, you know, till some good CEOs came on. But nowadays, when they play musical chairs, who's accountable?
Yeah.
They just take that $2 billion, you know, the $2 million bonus, and off they go to the next one. The next one comes in. And their entire job is to reduce costs. And at some point, it's like, you know, like any business, if you keep reducing costs, at some point, you're going to reduce the cost beneath what you require to deliver what you're selling.
Yep.
And if you've got to keep making 10% every year and you've already saturated your market, what do? You have to sell the same person two of the same things rather than one of them. Or you have to sell them something that's going to break so you could sell them it again. Or you sell them something that you can break over the internet so you could sell them another one again. It's the only way. It's like I think as mankind, we're separating from nature. You know, it's like the idea of family and trust in these things. It's like you can see some animals will drink with other animals at a waterhole because they trust them. They know what that other animal is. They're not the same species, but they'll still drink together because they can trust each other. They won't drink with other animals, you know, because they don't trust that animal not to hurt them. So this trust and all these kinds of things, this is what we're losing, I think. And it really damages us, sadly.
You know, I think there's a famous quote in finance where, like, when the tide pulls out, you know who's not wearing underwear and not.
Yeah, but, I like that.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's like quite prevalent in just like in what's happening right now. Not even just finance, but every kind of thing about, I don't know, not being in a family and just being, I don't know, a playboy or what, all these different things, the weirdness that happen in society and not being part of your community. Because as soon as the economy hits the rocks, it's going to come down to that fact of who you know, who can you support, who's there for you, who's the friend that's
stable.
Yeah,
who is stable,
who runs away from trouble, who's the one who's there,
who causes trouble. Yeah,
exactly.
That's the other thing. We've got these instigators. You know, it's like there's a large this whole. I think LGBT is not really the term for it. I just call them purple-haired progressive Smurf, right? This group that are like, I want to be a unicorn or I want to be whatever else. And it's like, it's causing trouble. It's not trying to get along with people. You know, there's so many approaches where people are going, you must accept these ideas. Like, well, if they were good ideas, I would.
Yeah.
You know, and it happens a lot. And it's like, whether it be finance or family or whatever. I mean, as I said, Australians are not breeding enough.
Yeah.
It is a problem. And at the end of the day, it's like I said to I was talking to my mum the other day. She's like, oh, you know, we try not to use boys and girls or whatever else. I said, do you realize if our kids don't breed, we're not going to have anyone to wipe our bums when we are old?
Yeah.
We need to breed now so we have people to wipe our bums when we're old. This is how we work. It's nature. You know, we've got to have this ecology of maintaining what we have. And at some point, you know, there's this great book. I don't know if you know about it. It's called Play Little Victims, right? And it's written by a Sydney author called Kenneth Cook back in the 70s. Not published currently, but you can get a secondhand copy of it.
Right.
And it's all about these mice who basically, you know, God ends the world, freezes the world. Two mice become conscious inside of a football field of like a American, you know, town. And every bit of life except these two mice is destroyed. And as they breed, that one of the mice starts to realize when they form government that they're going to breed and they're going to fill up the entire space that they have under the ice. And they're going to be, you know, on top of each other, completely taking up all the space if they keep breeding at the same rate. So they start to manage population control, and they go, how do we control the population? Let's have a war, because man had wars and he must have had the same population control problem we did. And then they invent the motor car, and they're like, oh man, look, the motor car killed a lot of people for man. That must be a population control device. And by the end, you know, they have to have abortions, they have to drink, they have to smoke, they have to drive cars with no brakes. And it always makes me wonder sometimes after reading this brilliant book, insightful book, like sometimes it makes me wonder some of the policies we bring into the world, if it's just about reducing our numbers. Because it's just, and I'm not saying there is a conspiracy, I'm just saying you look at it sometimes and a lot of these ideas, you just go, what's going on? Like, where did the trust? Where did the integrity? Where did the family unit go?
Yeah,
where did all the accountability go?
Well, prior to, like, let's say once I started having my family, I thought to myself, I should have done this ages ago. I shouldn't have mucked around with my life and bloody drunk with the lads and all this kind of stuff. I mean, really, where was I going in life? I wasn't really heading anywhere in a way. And I think if Australians had like a solid job that you can get into, you can buy a house, you can raise a family, I don't think many people would be these bloody bums that are just playing computer games all the time. I think people would actually try and do something a little bit more in the world. But just because of all these roadblocks and these obstacles to getting to that next level, it's almost impossible. They've become infertile by the nature of the economics around them.
Yeah, no, that what you just said is gold. That last sentence, they become infertile from the nature of the economics around that's perfectly well said. Well, this is what Jordan Peterson talks about. Clean your room. It's like you'll feel better about yourself.
Yeah.
A lot of this stuff. You're right. It's we don't have the opportunities, and there's a big, you start to really. I look at the government and how it kind of tilts the millennials against the baby boomers, and I think it's a really bad thing we're doing in the country. It's like. The millennials are all like, I can't buy a house because you baby boomers bought all the property. And it's true, they bought a lot of property, but that doesn't mean you can't buy a house. That doesn't mean you can't have some form of housing, Like it's just, you don't have what they had. You're going to have something different.
It's bullshit. It's got the most land in the, per capita still, I would say. Well, maybe Russia might have a bit more, but even so, it must be up there. And even say, oh, well, you can't live in the middle of Australia. There's tons of beautiful places that you can live anywhere. I don't agree with any of it.
But that's the thing. It's all about pointing a finger and hating each other.
Yeah.
And in that game, because I think you're right. There's plenty of places we can always change. I mean, having the show I have. It's quite astonishing that you really can work anywhere.
Yeah.
As long as the NBN's working in that particular area, he can work anywhere.
Yeah.
However, this finger pointing thing is. I think what it's about is destroying the wisdom passed through from the boomers to the millennials. I think this is the very first time in the last 100 years that I can amass from talking to, old wise people, that's ever happened. And it's like you talk to the boomers and the boomers go, this country is not what I was part of. You talk to boomers and they're like, the country used to be brilliant. We used to have the best country in the world. We don't anymore.
Yeah.
And I think they're right. I think they've got some really good points. You didn't have to lock your door in Australia until the late 70s if you chose to. You could have your door unlocked. You could leave your keys in your ignition barrel in Australia into the 70s.
Yeah.
How many people have their front door unlocked nowadays, and how many people would leave their car unlocked, let alone the keys in the ignition barrel?
No, it doesn't happen.
No, but we had trust. We had family. We had accountability because of community. And the question comes is I think one of the biggest questions we need to really answer is how do we rebuild community? You know what I mean? And I think it's this handout mentality of going to the government, give me.
Yeah.
The government needs to save me. People say, what do you think about taxes? And I've got this is just my opinion, okay? And I spent time around finance, so I have some clue. And I'm not saying that this will be easy to implement, but there are reasons behind this ideal that I'm going to present. I think that you should straight away not tax anyone under $35,000. Anyone should have tax-free threshold to $35,000. And the reason why I believe that is that's putting a roof over your head and food in your mouth straight away. If you do that, you're going to reduce crime and you're going to reduce a lot of hatred and a lot of anger in the country straight away because people are fed and housed. Yeah. That's the most important thing. Then $35,000 for your average person who is an employee. If they're self-employed, they should be tax-free to $60,000 or $70,000. Now, that may seem like a lot to someone who's going, oh, I'm employed and that seems unfair. It's like, no, a self-employed person's a different character. And very few people can be self-employed, to be honest. Most people try it and they don't do well at it. And that's okay. It's not for everybody. But a self-employed person is far more resilient than an employee. A self-employed person, if they tick a customer off, they lose a customer, they don't lose their job.
Yeah.
A self-employed person will normally be adapting into the situation because they have to survive.
Yeah.
And I think if we did that and we made self-employed people a $70,000 tax-free threshold, then a lot more people would give it a risk, and some would work and some would fail, which is natural order. However, when the economic crunch comes at some point, because I agree that at some point there is so much debt in the system, there is a ridiculous amount of debt in the system. And it comes from people buying new phones every year and things, you can't repair things, It's like people people don't really think anymore. It's back in the old days, you got your shoes resold 3 times.
Yeah.
You know, you show me how many millennials can darn a sock or darn their jeans. I'm not knocking millennials, as I said. It's just the thing that I've noticed they can't do. You know, even I'm good with tech. I repair mobile phone screens for the entire family, and once you get to 2016, it gets tricky for some of these models. Yeah. You know, some you can repair, some you can't. So it's like we're buying things, we're throwing them away, we have to buy another one. And that works well for the business growth of the country. Businesses, JB Hi-Fi does great. They grow 10% every year. Well, is it half because of the crap they're selling breaks and someone goes buys another one?
Yeah.
You know, I think we're going to have to return to some of the old school values where, you know, but this is, as I said to you, I think at the very beginning when we were chatting before this, it's like the way that the deep state, for lack of a better term, the controlling interest in government type bodies, the way they control people is they tell them what they need to think is important. And not everyone thinks those things are important. So we're always told money is important. And we're told it directly and indirectly all the time. However, money is only important for about 10% of people in the time I've had helping people out in life. And so 90% of those people are just going to become incongruent, which means they're trying to create a persona that they care about money, but deep down they really don't. And every time they do something, put money first over something that they deep in their hearts value more than money, they hurt themselves.
Yeah.
And it's that pain over and over again. So, you know, I think we're going to have a collapse. And people really, you know, it's, I'm going to use a biblical term, and I got this off Jordan Peterson. I think it is one of the most enlightening things, whether you know, as I said, whether you're a Christian or not, this is really genius, this little thing. And that is if you look at the Old Testament versus the New Testament, the Old Testament is all about the Israelis building a city, and they build, you know, a society. And they build it, and then someone corrupt takes over and it collapses. And they do this like 5 or 6 times in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And it collapses. It's like they're trying to create Zion, the perfect society, but they can't. And they fail over and over and over again. And then when it comes to the New Testament, this dude, Jeebus, right, he comes out and he says, hey, guess what? It's not about having the perfect society. It's actually just about having honest and, you know, and trustworthy individuals who contribute positively to society and who care for each other. And I think that's the big turn here, is this sticking your hand out saying to the government, give me another tax break, give me another whatever. I think giving the self-employed people a chance is saying kind of, let's give the people who sort it for themselves. It's like, we get immigrants in nowadays. You know, we've had immigration previously. It was called the Greeks and Italians. Yeah. You know, like the boomers had the Greeks and Italians turn up and they'd go, oh, you've got your funny food for lunch and your house has got funny lions and it's all concreted. They didn't just accept them, all right? But they were told to tolerate the Greeks and Italians.
Yeah.
Now, when the Greeks and Italians came out, so they weren't hated, but, you know, they didn't have to be friends with them. They were just said, tolerate these people. Now, what happened? Well, they tolerated them. Then they got to like them. Then the Greeks and Italians went and built the entire building industry. Yeah. And they built half of this bloody country. And so there were no jobs for them, so they went and made their own job.
Yeah.
Now, current immigration, that doesn't seem to be happening. And that's one of the problems with current immigration. We have immigrants coming here, and there are some jobs, granted. I mean, you could look at this from 2 ways. You could say there are no jobs because all jobs are kind of crap for what they were 10 years ago, but the world changes. But who's making the new, what is, you know, when I look at all these Africans and Middle Easterners and all that kind of, all that level of immigration, I can't identify what industry they're bringing that's positive to the country. Whereas Greeks and Italians, building industry, got it. Food, farming, you know what I mean? Like they own a lot of fruit shops, supermarkets, things like that. I can clearly see, okay, the Greeks and Italians came here, they built those industries, and I can measure that. I currently can't see what the current load of immigration is bringing as positive industries.
Yeah. Well,
and I think that's another discussion we're going to have at some point.
Yeah, I think like what, I mean, again, if it was drawn down to a community, okay, say if we had like a community of like how many people you could remember. So I don't know how many of the mind can remember, but maybe about 600 people, maybe probably less than that.
Yeah, 1,000's a good high number to have. Yeah. A round, nice, easy number. And about 1,000 people you can deal with.
Yeah, and then they said, okay, well, this local community next door, they've had a problem, they've had a flood. Would you be able to take them in and stuff like that? And we would. We'll say, yeah, look, I wouldn't like the same thing to happen to us. But obviously, they've got to find their own way. They've got to find their own jobs and all that kind of stuff. We can try and help them where they can. We give them a bit of food, give them a bit of shelter and stuff like that. But then they've got to find their way after that, and it's got to work back. It ain't just going to have, oh, here's a house, here's this, here's your family provided for. We wouldn't do all of that kind of stuff. It's not We're not
Well,
crazy.
it's not good for the person who's coming over.
Yeah.
If it's. I think one of the hardest things as being a parent is learning to watch your kids fail.
Yeah.
You know, they're young. You try and teach them the best you can. You know, they get to about 7 years old. They go off and they have their friends. You have to deal with the social, impact of that child and how their personality changes due to their young friends. And they become teenagers. And they start to kind of hit the years where they're working, the years where they're driving, the years where they're having relationships, the years where they start to have sex, all these things that they start to do.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of parents try and force their kids down a particular path. And then the kids just make mistakes over and over again because they don't learn anything. They're just trying to fit what their parents tell them to fit.
Yeah.
And their parents go, well, we'll pay for university for you if you do what we tell you, And yet, I think a better way to do it is to give the kids your wisdom. Say, hey, when I was your age, here's the honest truth of what I went through. You got to figure out your own life. I will support you no matter what because I love you, and I'll give you extra support if you're heading in these directions because I have wisdoms in these areas. But if you've got to go on your own way, go on your own way, and I might not be able to support you, but you've got to go your own way.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you've got to live with you. You're going to die with your own choices.
Yeah.
And letting them go. And I think what that enables them to do is to go, okay, well, I'm not going to reject all that wisdom because you're not trying to trap me, and they go and do whatever it is. And they always come back and go, oh yeah, like this thing sucks. Like I told you it would. I go, yeah, no, I found that out for myself. I guess some of your advice is right. And the wisdom gets handed down and then they make their own choices. And then they find what they're good at.
Yeah.
And they go, oh, I'm really good at this thing. And you go, I'm not good at that thing, but I'm glad you found what you're good at. And then you can see them become empowered teenagers. And this handing things out to everyone. Welfare is an interesting thing in this country, I think, because you've got to look at it from two sides. The first side is to look at it. I think it's great that in Australia, if you lose your job and you have a mental breakdown and you're sick, you're covered by your health and your basic thing. Unemployment, by the way, hasn't gone up in 20 years in this country. 20 years it's been, I think it's even 25 maybe. Unemployment has not gone up 1 cent in that long. Cost of living's gone up. Unemployment has not gone up at all. So when people complain about unemployment, it's a bit bogus, right? It really, it's nothing compared to what everything else is. So on one side, that's good. On the other side, if you economically study it back from the 70s backwards to the end of World War II, the lower class became the middle class without welfare, predominantly. In not having welfare encourages the lower class to move up into the middle class. There are a lot of arguments for that.
Yep.
And so I think it's something that's good. But the problem is since the Howard days, we used to judge things. It's like, since the Howard days, it's like, which box do you tick and you get the money if you do? And this is, some of the problems. It's like, it's like some people go, oh, you own $1 million house, therefore you can't have the pension. Yep. But it's like that $1 million house is a locked up asset for a family of which they live in. And it's like, that's not an asset of investment. That's their house. It just happens to be worth $1 million now because that suburb got popular 5 years before.
Yep.
And we don't give them pensions. And it's like, because they don't tick the right boxes. Whereas back in the 70s and 80s, we'd say to them, okay, well, let's have a look at your day to day. Oh, look, you really can't buy food. Damn, we need to give you some support here.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the things is this mentality Howard brought in of, it's like the baby bonus. Pump out a baby, get $5,000.
Yep.
Idiots went and bought TVs with them. That $5,000 should have been handed out slowly but surely to make sure that the milk or, the formula was paid for, the diapers were paid for, the cribs were paid for, things like that. Like all that should have been paid for instead. We should have just given them a health card. Here, this has got $5,000 of health care and education or whatever else you want on it. It's there. We pay the bill for you, but you can't buy TV.
Yeah.
So it's like the government hands out cash. And I think that was one of the biggest moves through the Howard era is of creating this put your hand out mentality that Australians now seem to have.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of bits and pieces when it comes to, especially if you look at like the vaccination laws and vaccinations. Oh, talk about a hot topic that you can really get into. But if you don't vaccinate your kid, right, and whether you agree with it or not, if you don't, the government doesn't give you money.
Yeah.
But there are parents out there who decide that's what they want to do. They truly believe that's what they're being the most loving they can be to their kids. And the government punishes them because they don't tick a box.
Yeah.
So we're punishing the parents who are prepared to lose money because they truly believe that's the most loving, healthy option. And we're punishing those people, Whereas someone who doesn't do any research into vaccines and says, sure, jab my kid with whatever you want, gets paid money.
Yeah.
And they're not a caring parent necessarily. They're just doing what they're told.
Yeah.
You know, and if someone sits there and goes, well, I believe vaccines are good because of whatever they've done the research, sure, have the money. You're a caring parent. But it's not about where you're at anymore. It's just which box do you tick. And I think that's a real problem. As you said, we need to, if people come here, help give them a leg up. Okay, here's a place to stay. Here's whatever else. But we'd have to build small houses for this stuff, right? And they don't want to do that. Yeah. Then say to them, okay, well, here's a lead to a job, you know, or what industry are you going to bring? As they do that, through action, we create our identity, I think, you know, and we're not doing that. We're just handing money out rather than forcing action that's constructive to the country.
Let me give you a hard question.
Yep.
Well, should you say that there should be a priority of allowing an immigrant in for humanitarian sort of reasons? So if you had a choice between white farmers in South Africa and a faction who's been prosecuted in Syria after some wars there, what do you think there should be sort of, what would culturally...
Okay, no, this is not a hard question. This is a very easy question for me.
Yep.
I don't care what color they are. I don't care where they come from, right?
Right.
The question I would ask is, what do you value?
Right.
You know, if this was the Republic of Humbug, I would have a list on the wall of what we value the most. Right. Yeah. So, for example, might be family. Family is what we value most in the Republic of Humbug. No matter what, we always value family first, which means if your family member is in hospital and you leave your workplace to go visit your family member and protect them, if your boss sacks you, we find the boss, right? Because family is number one value.
Yeah.
So I would look at the person and then go, out of you two people, who values family first? And if one of them doesn't value family, I take the person who values the family first. Because the problem is we're bringing people here. You know, when we talk about diversity is about multicolored skin. It's not about diversity. Because we had lots of Europeans coming here. We had, you know, you could bring Hungarians into Australia. You could bring Germans into Australia. You could bring Norwegians into Australia. You know, you could bring those from the Netherlands into Australia. They're all white. That is diversity. They all have different cultures. Yeah. They have different histories, different cultures, different backgrounds. That's true diversity, but it's not considered diversity because they're all the same skin color.
Yeah.
But the thing is they're all similar values, right? And so it doesn't matter what your skin color is. I don't think your skin color doesn't cause a problem in the country.
No.
You know, unless you're a bigot, in which case, you know, you look at someone's skin color and you judge them. That's not right. You know, that's a 100-year-old mentality, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
It's the values that we have. And, you know, it's like, I think, you know, I think the Islamics are a great example of this. Some of the nicest, kindest people I've ever met in my life have been Islamic.
Yeah.
They're lovely. They'll take the shirt off their back to give it to you because they truly believe in community in their church.
Yeah.
And they're Australian. They'll go to war for Australia before anyone else, you know. And they're Islamic. They're just their spaghetti monster. That's the name of their spaghetti monster.
Yeah.
But they're Australian and they value this country. You know, one of my best mates is Islamic. He's bloody as Australian as I am.
Yeah.
You know, he sounds a little different, looks a little different, but yeah, man, that Australian's more Aussie than most guys. And, you know, and I think that he's the example. It's his values. It's not his religion that determines what he is. It's his personal values. But this identity politics thing is a really dangerous game because it takes away from personal values.
Yeah.
It says your skin color matters. It says where you come from matters. And those things don't matter. They can be used generalizations to give some idea of whether you may or may not fit at a broad scope. This is what generalizations are. You know, it's the old, you know, jokes of, they're so politically incorrect nowadays. It's like, you remember in the 80s and the 90s as a kid, you'd have jokes about Ethiopians not eating. You know, there were jokes about Irish people being stupid, you know, the Irish submarine screen jokes. You can't tell any of these jokes anymore, you know, but we ran with them all the time when we were kids. And they were generalizations because Ethiopia was starving because the militia cut the food off from the docks, you know, so there was truth to that joke. Does it mean everyone's good or bad? No, it's like, I think we need to, as a country, and this is what I believe, everyone's going to make their own choice. I think as a country, we need to decide what values are important to us. And if we're going to let immigrants in, we need them to be on board with our values.
Yep.
And if they're not, go somewhere else where your values that you have are good. You know, so if they want to have 7 wives, don't immigrate to Australia. Immigrate to a country that wants you to have 7 wives.
Do you know what?
That's all.
Yeah. I think, you know, when we talk about history repeating, I've got this feeling that, say, the Muslim communities and the Muslims coming in is basically like the Germanic barbarians are at the gates for the Roman Empire. So all of us, our Western countries, so Canada, UK, America, and a little bit more to a lesser extent in Australia, we've kind of built up this Western empire, and then we've pumped it full of debt, and then we've sort of done the crazy things of spraying us with gold and being all into what's the word?
And the Western Empire has trashed some of these Middle Eastern countries. Like we need to admit the CIA's created and some of the stability in these. We've destroyed Libya from the Western world. Destroyed Libya. We're trying to destroy Syria.
Yeah,
we're causing problems.
Yeah, and we're destroying sort of like the role of the man and manhood, and that kind of thing is sort of eroding over time. The breadwinner, that's sort of dissipating. And then you've got this faction that's come into these countries, which has got a very strong masculine dominant sort of society, very religious community, strong sort of thing that's going on there. Pretty much the dire opposite of like a magnet to what the Western society is sort of going towards. And as it's crumbled, this sort of the barbarians sort of just move in without even having to lift a finger. Really, they're just like, okay, we've got the system in place, we've got the community, we've got everything else.
Well, the problem is as we hand power to the government, this is some of the doublespeak that 1984 refers to. So the doublespeak that is specifically is about enforcement, right? I think I talked about this on the family values one, maybe it was my gun control one. But there's this idea called enforcement. So it's okay for the United States, France, and England to bomb Syria because bad things are happening there. It's okay for those countries to be violent against the Syrians, according to the Western media.
Yeah.
But it's not okay for an Australian man to defend from an intruder into his home, protecting his family.
Yeah.
So violence is okay in one hand, but it's not okay with the other hand. When realistically, those two are completely diametrically opposite.
Yeah.
If someone breaks into your house, as a man, you should be able to defend your home, right? No matter who it is. If you've got clear evidence that they're breaking into your house, bait and trap's not fair enough. But if someone just breaks into your house, you should be able to do whatever you want. They should just be signing away their freedom of rights, effectively, the second they've crossed the boundary of your house uninvited. And the country, the bombing of Syria should be not allowed. So it's like we allow the thing that is morally apprehensible, and we will not allow the thing that is morally upstanding.
Yep.
And this is the paradox that the average person is put into. This adds to the stress. This is part of the deep state's game. These are all very, very deep games that are being played on people's unconscious minds that most people aren't even aware of. Very few people could even sit through a discussion this long to get to this point, and the people who are going to be sitting there going, "Yeah, that all sounds right," because most people get 10, 15 minutes into something and they give up because it's too hard. And then we're back to the accountability, and it's like legacy, right? Let's say family is the most important Australian value. Let's say we're going to protect the family, the old Republic of Humbug. We're protecting the family. What's the next thing you're going to protect? Well, legacy. Because if we don't make sure what we have today is protected for tomorrow, what's the point of doing it today? And everyone gives up.
Yeah.
So we need to protect our legacy. And then we come back all the way back to the start of the discussion. It's like the family home should not have interest rates on the mortgage because that's legacy. It's a roof over your head. Your kids can live there after.
Yeah.
It's something you can hand down beyond you. And then we need to protect the things like the connection between the elderly and the young because wisdoms get handed down. That's legacy as well. Yeah. We need to protect the local community sporting clubs. They need to be protected because that's where people of all ages can go to join together.
Yeah.
But it's like men's shed being taken down by, a couple of idiots who think that's sexist or whatever else. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, we need to protect these legacies we're leaving. And once again, there's a second value possibly when the immigrant's going to come here.
Yeah.
What do you want to have? Oh, I value family. Well, good. Okay, you're on the same page to start with. Okay, you value your family. Now, what's the next thing you value? Oh, I value being an Australian. I love your country. I want to be in this country. I want to contribute to the country. You care about our legacy. Come on in.
Yep.
That's, will you help out your neighbor if they run out of milk? Well, why would I do that? Because that's legacy, community, legacy. Oh, yeah, no, I'll do that. That sounds okay. That's all I have to do to live. Just be nice, help out my neighbor. Yeah. This legacy. And people, I guarantee you, people who are listening are nodding their heads going, yeah, I'll show you to be that. It was that. It is that. Why are we not doing that so clearly? Because it gets muddled up into this thing where no one describes it, what it is.
Can I ask you another funny one? It's going to go on the conspiratorial side.
Okay. As many as you want, mate.
Who do you think's in charge?
Deep state.
Deep state.
And the deep state is a whole bunch of organizations that have non-disclosure agreements. The World Trade Organization, the World Bank are two of the big ones. And there's some very big money involved.
And then who's behind them, would you say? Would you say the old rich families and all that kind of stuff?
Look, I could speculate that. I think there might be. I don't think there's like the 12 families running. I don't think the world's that simple.
No.
You know, I hate to say it, but it's like, you know, it's like these Victorian police with the breath test that got busted the other day faking breath tests. You know, they're being corrupt. Now, don't get me wrong. I always give respect to police officers. They deal with people who are dead, who have, you know, pooped themselves, dying a week ago. They deal with people who are addicted in street corners, on crack, on all sorts of stuff. Police officers do a hard damn job. I don't think they get paid well enough to do their job. That's why we don't get the greatest of police officers. We pay crap. And it's a hard, mentally taxing job. The Victorian police are clearly corrupt because they're setting targets that can't be met. Now, I would prefer the Victorian police to be able to turn around and go on strike, or, you know, or as per se, for lack of a better term, and say, no, these targets are unachievable. They're stupid. And they're on the front line. I'd like the front line people to be able to do something. So all it takes for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing. And I think that's, to be honest, the apathy. You know, it's like, was it Gallup survey? Oh, I can't remember who did the survey. I spoke about it in one of my episodes. But world apathy. You know, if you look worldwide, only something like 13% of people at work are actually trying to do something beneficial and positive to their workplace. In Australia, it's 25%. 32% kind of don't give a shit, and like 45% don't give a fuck at all. At all. That's really how bad it is. 1 in 4 people are trying to do something good in their workplace. 1 in 4. That's how scary that gets.
Yeah.
And apathy is one of our biggest killers. That's going to collapse the system, the apathy. And then when we have apathy, see, nature's got a way of balancing itself. As much as I talk about doom and all this other stuff that's got to go wrong, the new system will start. Something, you know, every time the world dies out or one species dies out, another one takes over.
Yeah. We
weren't the first ones to walk this planet, and we won't be the last. You know, but the question is do we do good while we are here?
Yeah. And
I don't think right now, we are doing.
You know, when you talk about Victoria Police or just police in general and stuff like that, do you ever get the feeling like where they go, they create all that, they're watching people now online and they need more people.
They are. The $32 million that went into the Sydney snooping facility.
It's like they've replaced the jobs that were like Bobby's on the beat and trying to like do the actual hard work. Now they're just sitting in a nice desk and just watching people all day long.
Here's a question for you, right? And if you're a police officer, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this one. If anyone ever was listening to this cop, you notice they all wear stab vests now?
Yeah.
Bulletproof vests and stab vests. I never saw that in the 70s and 80s. Now, bulletproof vests did exist in the 70s and 80s. Tactical vests were a thing, but they never wore them. And now that means one of two things. Either the community doesn't trust the police, or the police don't trust the community, right?
Yeah.
Or we have some very violent people out on the streets that we're not dealing with. To be honest, all of those answers are correct.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the other thing, too, I mean, it's not just the police. I mean, if I was a police officer, I'd be so frustrated because those guys get sued. I mean, there's some bad ones, but there's bad every job. You know, every job you look at, there's a bad one.
Yeah.
You know, but there's some really bad cops. But then again, there's good ones, and the good ones, I've known a couple of good ones, and they have mental breakdowns in the police.
Yeah.
They can't be good. And the reason why they can't be good is you get a good cop who arrests someone who should be arrested, and then they send them to, you know, the magistrate, and they'll stand up and they'll take a day off work and they'll stand in front of the magistrate, putting their face in front of a criminal, you know, so that criminal can find out who they are and where they live, risking their family.
Yeah.
And the magistrate will go, no, this person who's, you know, a recent immigrant smoked ice once, and therefore this crime's not their fault. And that's happened several times in Victoria. Victoria's suffering a lot. So I think, as I said, you can't ever. I think one of the biggest problems is that people oversimplify things. I mean, it's great to be able to simplify things down so people understand them, but people oversimplify things. It's like, oh, the police are bad. No, the police are like anything. They're in this ecological system.
Yeah. Where,
there's, you know, their job, which is not a business. You know, we shouldn't be running policing, nursing, teaching, or any emergency service or community service. It should never be run with an MBA. We shouldn't be doing profit margins and all that stuff. That's ridiculous. It stops them from doing the real work, you know, and so a police officer gives up because they see the magistrates fold. And I don't know why the magistrates are folding, but the court system in Australia has a lot to answer for. As I said, family services, horrible court system, really horrible. It's just mean to the non-custodial parent, to be honest. Doesn't matter what gender you are. Yeah. It's just mean to the non-custodial parent. criminal magistrates, they do make judgments based off gender and race. It's true.
Yeah.
You know, you look at any time that a teacher goes up for sexually molesting a student. If it's a male, 10 years. If it's a female, no service.
Yeah.
That's how it is. And you know, so these judgments, you know, it's like, I guess if you're a queer, gay, Muslim man, maybe you can just kill everyone and you'll never go to jail. I don't know. Maybe, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And I'm not making that statement against anyone. I'm making that statement as like, that's an observation. I'm seeing these things happen over and over again. And if I make a surmisal, that you would think that might be plausible.
Yeah.
And then where's the accountability? If the magistrates aren't holding people accountable, then once again, we're into apathy again. Because people get to apathy when they have no hope, when they have no contribution, when they're not working at something. They just go, oh, who cares? I don't get anything out of it.
Just when he was talking there, just reminded me, so going off the beaten path here a bit, but I was reading something on the ABC News website about differences between boys and girls. Did you see that by any chance?
No, I didn't. No. I may have seen something in the
It was a big survey, and they're like saying, girls are more caring, girls do this, and literally girls are just like the top in every kind of, they'll help with the chores in the house, they'll do this, blah, 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 blah. The only thing the boy was better at was they were more geared to getting money. All right, and then they were like, this is shocking, like, but even so, boys get given more money and all this kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, it's...
And then I thought to myself afterwards, I was like, hold on a minute. Boys are programmed to go out, hunt, bring back the bread.
No. See, now you're talking about violence. Now, this is the problem. That survey that you just read, I would look at that and go, well, of course, because we're not looking at positive violence, right?
Yeah.
So I always look at it, you got to take men and women back to the family unit, back to the single family, no society, right? Remove society from it. Women... And this is generalization, so of course there's going to always be exceptions to this generalization. However, this applies to the majority, I think. Women make babies. Therefore, they're geared neurologically and biologically, typically, to nurture.
Yeah.
All right? So if they're going to make a thing, well, that thing is in a chaotic world. When a woman makes a baby being pregnant and everything, the pregnant woman is in a world of chaos around her.
Yeah.
So a woman can nurture, but a man protects and provides. So the man goes out into the chaos and comes back with food for the woman. The woman takes the food and turns it into the nurturing meal and feeds the kids. You know, the chaotic world comes to attack the woman, and the man holds the bubble to protect the woman and enforces the safe space for her.
Yeah.
We can't have a safe space without having violence. The two are not exclusive to each other. They're mutually connected. To have a space that is safe, someone has to keep guard over it.
Yeah.
This is the joke. Everyone goes, oh, can't have any violence. It needs to be a safe space. No, to have the safe space, someone has to protect it.
Yeah.
And there's more double speak. All this politically, the political correct movement, which I think is, that's deep state owned by the media. They pump it through the media crap. The politically correct movement destroys truth.
Yeah. Because
you censor the truth. And that is that women are better at nurturing generally. Men are better at protecting and going out and hunting down things. Now, it's like I make that statement and some snowflake's going to go, you sexist, misogynistic, whatever. And it's like, well, I never said that a woman can't hunt better than a man at some point. I'm sure there's going to be some mad hunter female. Of course there is. And I bet you there's some dads that are better at caring for their kids than some mums.
Yeah.
But if we talk generalizations, see, no one can have the complicated discussion. It always has to be simplified down to stupid, like too simple. You can oversimplify things, and I think we do a lot in this world.
Yeah.
Rather than looking at the factors and just what's going on behind that.
I talk to like most women, right? And I say like, would you like to be at home with like and just look after the kids and stuff like that? And I know some things, some women go, oh God, I need to get away from the kids and stuff like that. But literally, it's like 90% would say, I'd love that, but I've got to earn some money.
Imagine if we said to them, you can stay at home, run a small business, be self-employed, and earn up to $60,000 without paying any tax. You know how many women would be staying home happily at that point? They could earn money too, so we're not taking anything away from them.
Yeah.
These are all the bits. And my Mrs. Humbug constantly complains because there are other women who say to her, oh, you're just a slave to your family, right? She's a wog mum. She'll wake up at 2 a.m. to make a cup of tea for our son and his mates when they get back from the pub. And they're all, you're a slave. And she's like, I do it because I feel good. I enjoy it. And it's sacred to her. She considers her duty as a mother to be a sacred thing.
Yeah.
And
it's a beautiful thing. It's lovely. It's a lovely thing.
It is, but and I think this is, I think it's great that at least women still remember what it is to be a sacred woman, right? Yeah. What's being a sacred man? Like, that question is one that's where we're losing it. Yeah. And we're losing our true safe space, and we're losing our society because we don't know what a sacred man is anymore.
I think that, like, the real sort of like the grind of a man is just like, you got to open that door every morning. The kids might be like screaming, they might be hungry, all that kind of stuff, and you got to go out there and you got to find work. And it doesn't matter how long it takes you to get back home. You've got to get something on the table when you get back. That's bringing it down to its boiled down level. That's all it comes down to, being a man.
You need to lay your life on the line for the family. Be prepared. And see, I can't remember who it was, but someone said, I think long ago, old wise words, if a man has not found his cause that he's willing to die for by 30, he'll never be a man.
Yeah.
And it took me a while. It wasn't, I'm the same as you. I spent a lot of my younger days kind of having fun. And then the second my daughter was born, my world changed.
Yeah.
I looked at women entirely differently.
Yeah.
I always used to think they were girlfriends, things. And then all of a sudden I made one of the little things.
Yeah.
And she popped out and I'm going, oh no, I made one of these things. Oh, I've been so horrible to these little things all my life. I need to change my behavior.
Yeah.
This is why families are so, but then again, it's like this idea, it's just sacredness. It's not there. I think, ironically, this is going to sound really odd. I think the whole safe sex, free sex thing caused a lot of problems with that.
Yeah.
I think, I always talk about human beings aren't walking, talking meat batteries. We always look at ourselves at just a biological level, but we have these senses. You can sense when something's about to happen in a room full of people. You can, how often do you walk into someone randomly somewhere? And the chances of that are very slim. It's like we're electrically connected to each other, and it goes all the way back to sex. And sex, we're electrically connected to each other. And the whole safe sex of putting rubber over the electrical connection destroys the electrical connection. And then they say, go do this as much as you want. There's no consequences. But there is. The consequence is that you've got nothing to lose. And this is the thing. I think you really have to have something to lose in life, something of value to lose before you're ever really getting anywhere.
Yeah. And I think, obviously, like, where we talked about products earlier, it's like the throwaway culture. And nothing lasts forever. You just throw it away, you start again. That's what's shown now in modern day marriage. Nothing lasts forever. Like, you get married, get divorced, then like there's that kind of program. Almost like people say that to you, like, "Oh, you'll get divorced by 40 and all that stuff." And I'm like, no, it doesn't work out like that, I'm afraid.
Well, hang on. The reason why divorce rates are so high is because no one knows what their values are.
Yeah.
So one person with, everyone thinks it's about individuals. It's about relationships, I think. And so if you have a set of values and someone else has a set of values, every relationship is about compromise. When you talk to old guys who've been married 50 or 70, they always give you the advice, you don't need to win, mate. That's how you have a good marriage. You don't need to win. And what they're really saying is learn to compromise with your partner. Now, if your values are both very close to each other, when you compromise, there's very little required to compromise.
Yeah.
But if one of you is far on the left and the other one's far on the right, when you compromise, whoever compromises is going to be in a lot of pain because they're going to have to really leave their values to compromise. And when we're all trying to fake being something, and we're talking about Facebook, all these social medias, they add to this problem. We're all faking being, or not. There's just people out there faking being celebrities.
Oh, yeah.
And when those values are so far apart, you end up with, of course, you're going to get divorced. You had no values that work together. And that's not saying that people are choosing people with the wrong values. Most of the time, the problem is people lie to themselves what their values are.
Yeah.
I had two very different stages of life. My first, half of my life was earning a lot of money, being very successful, standing up in front of loads of people and talking about how to be great. Earned a heap of money too, lots of that. The second half of my life has been learning how to be nothing.
Yeah.
And actually trying to work out what we don't need so we only waste time with what we do need.
Yeah.
And how do we make sure that lasts forever? It's not about growing, it's about sustaining.
Yep.
It's not about what's new, it's about what lasts. not about what's right or wrong. It's about what's real.
Yeah. Well, do you ever watch these videos where like you get these people in old age homes and you ask them what's the 10 most important things to you and stuff like that? I always say is spending time with my family. I regret that I worked too much. I regret that I did this, and I wish I could have spent more time, especially when they were younger and stuff like that. That's all. Pretty much every old person who's sitting in an old age home, that's all they ever say.
Youth is wasted on the young, isn't that the old saying?
Yeah.
Having all that energy, we don't know. And this is why that's why I always talk about the wisdom being handed down. This is why, ironically, I think I'm one of the few people to say this. I think the economic collapse may be good.
Yeah.
I actually think it may be good. It will give us a chance to reset. It will force generations together under one roof again.
Yeah.
They're going to have to learn how to tolerate each other because they're going to be living in the same room.
Yeah.
People are going to have to learn how to tolerate basic food again because there's not going to be a choice.
Yeah.
Uber is not going to exist because people are just going to be sharing a car anyway because no one can afford fuel.
Yeah.
And everyone goes, oh, but that could be hard. But this is, I think human beings are a funny creature. It's like our bodies want comfort, right? Your body always wants to have comfort of some sense, but your consciousness wants pain.
Yeah.
Your consciousness grows from going through hard things. You don't grow when things are easy.
Yeah.
It's like, I think the difference I think one of the wisdoms I'm kind of getting to, I think I'm kind of old enough to speak on this. If anyone older than me thinks I'm not, perhaps correct me in the comments down below. But what I'm learning is coming to middle age is I'm learning what rings to not throw my hat into, as per se. I'm learning what not to bother with now.
Yeah.
I figured out very quickly what I'm not. Now I kind of figured out what I am. Now I'm trying to figure out what not to waste my time on anymore.
Yeah.
And what is left is me. And if something doesn't work, it doesn't matter. I didn't waste any time. I'm true to my values. I didn't waste any time on what I'm not. I think, when we're young, it's like we're this jagged rock. I always say that it's like we're like a rock that split off the cliff face and we land in this river, and the river's called life. And the river pushes you no matter what. You can't tell the river to stop pushing you because the river don't give a shit. It just keeps pushing you. And as you go down the river, you can struggle as much as you want, but you can't go back up the river, ever. The river always is strong enough to push you down. You don't know where you're going, but the river knows where it's going. Just somehow it has this magical way of knowing where it's going. It's flowed that way for a long time. Whether you think it's right or wrong, it's irrelevant. The river goes that way.
Yeah.
And as you travel through life, you're going to impact things on the riverbed. You're going to hit things. You're going to hit the side. You're going to hit whatever. And it's going to knock bits off you. And I think a lot of life's about learning how to let go. It's always about, you watch any of these videos on YouTube, it's always about gain, how to have more, gain more, how to be more.
Yeah.
It's total wrong. It's about how to let go, I think, is the real secret. I think that's the secret that sits beneath everything, is how to let go. And as we move down the river, if we don't get caught up, like if we get, if a part of us gets caught up and we don't let go of something, it can break us sometimes, and if you hang on to something, it is at the risk of being broken. And until you've either changed careers big time, had children, had a big divorce, or bought and sold enough property, you really don't know what life's about. When you've done some of those things, sure, you've got something under your belt. You can say, I know what life's about. I've done one of those big major. But when the ones who successfully get to the end, when you look at those old people you're talking about, what I always notice is they're always really well-rounded.
Yeah.
You talk about, something to them. You might say, have you heard about this thing going on in the world? And they just go, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's okay. Don't worry about it. That's silly people having silly conversations. If you talked about some of this gender stuff to like a little old lady, she'd just look at you and go, it doesn't matter. They're just silly people having silly conversations. That happens in the world. Don't worry about it. How's your family? Have you looked after your family? Have you said hello to your kids? Yeah. Have you made your missus a cup of tea? Have you given her a hug today? That's what the little old lady will tell you.
Yeah.
Say to an old man, this banking thing, they're all crooks. Don't buy into that crap. No debt. Work for yourself. Keep every dollar you can. Save. Grow. Well, same advice. It hasn't changed. I think letting go, and I think the goal of life is we've got to let go of as much as not important to you, and keep what is important to you. Fight for that stuff that is important. Boy, at the time you get to the end of the river, you're a pebble, and I think that's what life is. It kind of takes our rough edges off, in a sense. When we're born, we've got to work out we're a rock, and then like in your teenage years, you work out how your rock bounces off other rocks, and then you get into your 20s, and you might make other little that you're traveling down the street with or something, or, but you kind of get an idea by your 30s. It's like you need to have something that's bigger than yourself to live for. You got to be prepared to go down for something, whether it be a family or an ideal, it doesn't matter. I think there's a lot of people who don't have families in life who still do great work in the world. They do charity or they care for people. I think they do. And to say they didn't have kids, they're not valuable. No, I think that's wrong. They've done great, do service to the world somehow. And by the end, you're nice round pebble.
Yeah. When you mentioned about like when crises hit as well, the old people always say this is like, especially in the wartime, it's like the happiest times of their life was during like that wartime when the communities had to band together and work as one and like know that there's the common enemy and they've got to strive together. They never felt more alive than any time in their lives than that moment then. It's strange, isn't it? It's like at the crisis that they actually feel they're most alive.
Well, it's because you're under the most pressure. Your consciousness is thriving. And the other thing too is you don't have time to waste. See, it's like we can only have this kind of gender identity discussion in society because we don't have a war going.
Yeah.
If you're in a trench and you've got bullets flying over your head, you don't care if someone identifies as being a unicorn. That's not important. So we're really overcomfortable in the Western society. I do agree that's something that we're just too comfortable.
Yeah.
And we've made ourselves this way. And, the comfort is it serving us well? I don't think so. I think it needs to be a little bit more uncomfortable for, the average Joe. I know it's uncomfortable for some of the lowest economic people. I know they struggle on bills and bits and pieces. But then again, there's the other thing. It's like poor people. You ever see someone who runs a business? The person who was poor when they were young, when they run a business, they don't waste a cent.
Yeah.
But if someone was rich, they always go bankrupt when they run a business. They don't have a clue what they're doing. So the poor people will come through being poor, And as I said, but it's like we need the middle class because it keeps everyone stable. It's like maybe we are a bit too comfortable and we need to lose some of this comfort, And it's like, what are we prepared to fight for? It's like you were talking about Facebook and Google having data on us, right?
Yeah.
How much data should they have or none?
Yeah.
But at the other end of the day as well, it's like it's just how it is nowadays. If you do something, it's on the internet, it's there. No matter what you do, it's there forever.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not, it goes into the time machine and it's up there. I think those companies were good for the first 4 years. They were great ideas. They showed it. They were proof of concept.
Yeah.
Like anything, the money backed them, and now they're there. But then again, we're having this discussion in a Discord server, and I pay a couple of bucks every month to Discord, because I appreciate it. I don't think everyone can use it for free. I'll pay for them because I have a little room where people who are of same mind can come and sit and talk to each other, and it's protected, and everyone, you can't just get into the room. You have to be approved into it. You have to know something. You have to have someone vouch for you. It's like an old bikie club in a way, right?
Yeah. And
it's like, that works. And a lot of people like that. They appreciate that I am the enforcer of this little electronic space, And I make sure I talk to people. If someone, we had a communist come in the other day and he's like, oh, be careful. I'm a Marxist communist. Everyone be ready. And I was like, mate, settle down. You don't need to use fighting words, and be prepared if you're going to challenge people for good debates.
Yeah.
And make sure we keep all this gentlemanly.
Yeah.
So I enforce the protection of the little area. So I think big companies like that are going to dissolve into smaller ones. YouTube will become the new TV. I mean, I don't think they're so big now. And you look at the dopamine hits people are on their phones. Like, I don't know if that's going to dissolve. But if it does, I mean, we're going to have some mad depression to deal with in the world, that's for sure.
I've got a feeling, though, the way that you talk and I talk and how I feel about things is that I'm sick of the rat race, and I would do anything to just get out of here as soon as I can and move down the coast or whatever and just get away to a nice, quiet town. I mean, I'm not bothered by having, as long as I've got like a supermarket and a Bunnings nearby, I'm pretty satisfied. I can pretty much keep myself happy.
See, this is the joke about it, right? When I left the city for the country life, I was in a part of the city that was 24 hours a day. And I've traveled the world. I've seen 24 hours. I moved to a place where every restaurant is closed on a Monday by about 8 p.m. So if you haven't ordered your dinner by then, or if you haven't gone to the supermarket by then, you're eating chips. That's it, or baked beans. That's it. Yeah. That's what you got. And it got me for a while, but eventually, because of technology, we have this thing called eBay.
Yeah.
So I don't need to have 9 million shops around the corner. I can just go on eBay and just be patient while the postage turns up.
Exactly. Yeah.
I have enough. I have a 24-hour servo. I can just go to the local servo if I need to in the middle of the night to get milk. If the supermarket's closed. So we don't. it's like, it doesn't take much. It's, as I said, it's like, can I pay the bills? Can I order at a restaurant without being worried too much? And is there just somewhere I can buy milk at 2 a.m. in case I need to?
Yeah. I think this is...
we really don't need, we don't need as much as we have.
And I think it's not like I'm not the only one who's like got this way of thinking. I think pretty much like you hear what's happening in California, loads of people are trying to get out of there now. The cost of living, but crime, everything else. I think the same thing is going to happen to all of these, London, Sydney, all of these places. People are going to think, I'm paying too much, cost of living's here too much. What am I living for? I'm in this rat race. I've got to jump on people to get on the train and the buses. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go somewhere else. I'll go up the coast.
There's a lot of millennials who live in vans and stuff. They do have that right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The old nomadic. Yeah. Well, but this is where I think, when you're saying who runs this show, it's the debt that's running the show, the banks that run this show, because they want you to be in debt.
Yeah.
If everyone had little tiny homes, and could just be free and roam, we wouldn't all have a reason to slave away in our economics. And then we could do what we love. If we did what we love, we'd be true to ourselves and we wouldn't be stressed every day.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't always do what you love necessarily. You've got to find where what you love meets what you're good at. It might not be what you absolutely love, but you might be okay doing what you're good at. It might be morally okay for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that takes away the stress, and people will stand by what they believe.
All right. Okay. Well, I think we've spoken for ages here, haven't we? This is a great conversation.
This is what happens in humbug conversations, mate. You start talking to the goat, it keeps going and going and going.
I'm just getting a bit conscious that, like, I don't even think I'm wondering if anyone could stay here and be that patient for this long. But it's been a wonderful conversation anyway.
Yeah, look, it's the fun of it. It is what it is, and I tell you what, Matt, you're definitely, your stuff you're doing, I can definitely see you driving at a very high level, and I hope people do spend some time watching your stuff.
Well, I just
do a good job. I don't think there's many that do this type of thing. You know what I mean? Like CEC does a lot of interviews, but they're always interviews.
Yeah, I always think like the old everyone's used to these like interviews where everyone's got this like PowerPoints and they disagree and they're like intensity and then that's the interview over and done with. But it's nothing ever like that. I don't think in reality you might have a few little issues here and there. I've got loads of conversations with a leftist, total communist basically, and we're arguing, and I'm coming from a position of being a capitalist basically. I'm more of like a anarchic capitalist in a lot of ways, and then I'm just like talking to him about all these different subjects, and we end up agreeing with everything. It's surprising how you boil things down and you come to the end view that you actually are arguing about the same thing a lot of the times.
Yes, as long as the values are the same, then you're arguing about how to go about something, not what you're going about. Yeah, and everyone wants to protect the working labour force. Yeah, this is why Marx wasn't a communist. Marx was just a poor man who had a rich friend, and he just couldn't understand why capitalism destroyed the labour force, as far as I can understand. Yeah. And he wasn't against capitalism. He wanted capitalism to work without destroying the labour force, which is social democracy. And this is the weird thing. It's like, I don't know why everyone's touting on about communism, because it doesn't work. It's not good. There's no motivators in communism. You need people to be motivated so you get ingenuity, know. And this is something that, like, when you look at the races, and I mean, it's like black people physically typically are much stronger and can go longer. Right. Asians are smarter, but they only learn by rote. And Europeans typically are the most ingenious because they win the most Nobel Peace Prize, and the most kind of awards because they invent new stuff. The Chinese and Japanese can take anything, make it smaller and better, but they don't invent anything new. The Chinese wisdom's like 2,000 years old, and that's what they got. So it's like, it all kind of adds up, and it's that ingenuity. So it's like, as I said, it all comes down to values every time. And if you see that you need people to be engineering new things and being inventive and creating the new bits and pieces, then capitalism is okay as long as you have some controls, and that's social democracy. Communism ends up in the gulag. I mean, ironically, right now, in the most capitalistic system we've ever had in the world, we have, effectively a Nazi control by Western media. Yeah. You say something, you're labeled, and no one has a discussion with you. It's just you're doing bad. And that's Nazi. It really is. And it's like the people who are calling everyone Nazis are themselves Nazis. But, Churchill said this at the end of World War II. He said the next fascists of the world will claim not to be fascists, but they will be the one, and that will be the next world. So Churchill called this 70 years ago. He thought this was going to happen, and it's like that. All we need is we need to protect everyone, but not prevent people from achieving something. It's like I always say, it's like if a CEO could only take a bonus of, say, 5 times whatever the lowest earning income is in that company. Imagine how much more money would be in companies. Imagine if like Japan has a great rule. It's like a CEO can only earn 10 times more than the lowest paid worker or something. I think that's Japanese.
That's good,
yeah. And that's brilliant. You still earn a lot more than everyone else does. That's cool. If you're the best, you get paid the best.
Yeah.
How much? We have a spread, but how much of a spread do we need? That's all it comes down to, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then it gets to a point where, like, if people get just so much more money than the average person, then you're just saying, like, you're creating gods and just this dredges of society, where you create all this tier system, not even just classes, but you almost creating this subhuman, like, breed in comparison to this.
How corrupt you give any human being, including me. If you gave this goat millions upon billions of dollars, I'd probably become corrupt.
Yeah.
It'd either have to give it away or it would corrupt me. And it's the nature of human. No tree grows forever. I always talk about this with business. There is no tree that grows forever. Trees get to a maximum height. They might grow a little tiny bit from that point on, but trees grow fast and then they slow down their growth. It's like companies that start should be growing at 10% every year. Yeah. But by the 5th or 6th year, that should be 8%, 6%, 5%. And then from then on, just any growth is good. Yeah. Just don't go backwards. And if you go backwards, don't go backwards for more than a year in a row.
Yeah.
That's the difference. It's, as I said, I think the biggest sociological discussion comes in what can we get rid of? Not what can we do better? Not what more can we get? We need to start having a discussion. What can we take away and still do what we need?
Yeah.
Because it's like, you think about the most free you are in life is when you can, when you're traveling with a backpack.
Yeah.
You got nothing. There's nothing to be stolen. If anything gets stolen, you can replace it. It's like we've got no heirlooms anymore, and there's no freedom by having too much crap. Yeah. The bigger the houses, the more shit you fill with them, the more stuff you lose on a fire, the more trauma you go through. It's like
the opposite is always true, isn't it?
Yeah. It's like
the more you have, the more you got to lose.
This idea of ownership. It's like you can own something. I feel it from a philosophical point of view. I think it's a joke. We don't ever own anything. When you die, your consciousness continues somehow.
Yeah.
How? I don't know. Then you enter religious belief. But your consciousness doesn't go because you have this like after death experience that everyone keeps coming back with. Like there's consciousness after your body ceases somehow. Yeah. So when you die, you don't take this stuff with you. So you don't own it. You don't assimilate it into yourself. All you do is caretake for it while you have it.
Yeah.
I think if we, it's like rich people are not caretaking for what they have very well.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's really caretaking for, and we don't caretake. We could care. If everything you owned became something that instead of when you bought something, instead of it sitting on a shelf, imagine it was shackled to your ankle. My son's working this stuff out at the moment. He's like, I need to sell stuff. I'm like, why? And he's like, I just realized I want to travel, and I can't travel with this much crap, so I have to put it somewhere. And I'm like, well, don't go too hard, because if you get rid of everything, then you got nothing. And he's like, no, I don't know where the line is. I said, but that's learning life, mate. Make that decision on your values. Try and have as little as you can. Have what you need, plus a little bit extra to have a bit of fun. And, if you need something, make yourself wait 2 weeks. Imagine if every purchase everyone made had to wait 2 to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And you actually have to think about it.
Yeah. Try and get a refund in the meantime when you've decided you want to get something else.
Yeah, like 2 to 4 weeks. You said if you went onto eBay and you hit the buy now button, and then you had to wait 4 weeks for an email saying, do you want to buy this now? Are you sure you want this? We'll dispatch it tomorrow.
Yeah.
I wonder how many of those buttons would get hit the second time.
Yeah. It goes to show, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's just philosophical ideas that I think we've got to throw. I think they're the kind of, I don't know how my show's still developing, and I kind of get caught. Everyone wants money shows. You put a money show together, you get like thousands of views so quickly. Talk about Australian real estate, you get thousands of views if it's in the title and keywords. But the real estate is almost like the end game, and it's the entire sociological construct that we're currently not talking about that builds to the end. Like no one wants to talk about the conversation you need to get to that end conversation. They just want to, it's like all about the money shot. It's got nothing to do about the 20, it's like the overnight success. It's never about the 20 years that you put in before anyone else noticed you and you became an overnight.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I always find that more interesting as well. Like, even if there's some famous person there's a documentary on, I'm not even interested in, I'll just sit there and watch it. I was watching like something weird like Andre the Giant the other day.
Oh, he's a character.
I was just watching it. I was just like, I find it so interesting, just the life stories.
Yeah, well, I think you're probably one of the few true journalists in the world. I don't think there's many of us, and we don't realize we're journalists. Like I think it took me 30 episodes to work out what the hell I was actually doing as a journalist.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, hang on a second here. I have to think about what I actually report on. I started to make decisions. I had subject matter I could have reported, and I was like, I choose not to, because it's not good for the world to talk about some stuff.
Yeah.
And I go, no, I'm not going. I used to do a lot of, gender stuff and other bits and pieces, and I just decided, unless it's really important, I'll leave it be. It's just a hurtful conversation that starts an argument. I turned into that little old lady. Silly speak for silly people. Leave it alone.
Yeah, yeah. I see. There's a lot of you get like these, like the Paul Joseph Watsons and all that kind of stuff, and they've got this narrative, and then everyone seems to be just humming that same tune. And I almost feel like, InfoWars is almost like connected to the CIA, and is, what do they call it? Sort of like a mind kind of, it's another mind control sort of operation where they're sort of channeling it out to the masses.
It's like, if he's giving away all these secrets, why are they letting him live? And you know what it is? We call it the David Icke syndrome. It's the label I've come up with it. It's like, if David Icke is actually telling you the truth, and they want to hide that truth, they could kill him. It only costs $50,000 to take someone out. Not expensive, really. If he's really spewing all these truths, they'd get rid of him, right? But those channels are left up because they're mental. And if you watch how when people consume a lot of David Icke, they themselves go mental. When people consume a lot of Alex Jones, he sends people crazy. They get depression, they get anxiety when they watch him. It's all about drama cycle, but that's what
they give some stuff that's true. They give a lot of truths, and then they just twist it, and then they're like, oh no, it's not right. Yeah.
I mean, someone said to me the other day. Someone said, how do you know when? Because I've traveled a lot, and they said, how did you know when you've done all your traveling? And I said, you can stop traveling the day you realize that every human being around the world's doing the same shit. We will wake up, we take a shit, we have a shower, we go to work, we come home, spend some time with our family, we entertain ourselves from the slavery of our work, go to sleep, we wake up, we repeat. We all have something that we kind of do to entertain ourselves, but it's like, what do we do to add back to society? Only very few people. Yeah. As I always say, there's a very small, maybe 1-2% of the world is doing good stuff. They're really trying to make the world a better place. 1-2% of the world is literally trying to feed their own pockets every day. And the other 96% are gap filler. They will be born and they will die having done nothing constructive. But if everyone was doing good and bad, the world would be too hectic.
If there's any kind of thing that you'd like to have, is it just need to have people to have these conversations in their life, something that means something to themselves, rather than just getting on each day and talking about how your sports team went and all that kind of stuff. It would be really nice.
How the sports team went, what was on the news. It's the old pub conversation. Yeah. Well, the 1% will use the drama cycle to scare everyone, and fear is much more motivated. Human beings are the only thing that react and work harder when you scare them. It's like if you go outside and whip a cow, it doesn't produce more milk; it produces less milk.
Yeah.
If you go flog a tree, it produces less fruit. But if you tell a human being you'll hurt their family, they work harder. And we're the only being on earth that does that. Yeah. And we do that because we believe, I think it is that because we believe that this life is real. I think this life's a dream. It's like the old row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Life is but a dream. And I don't.
That song really signifies with me as well, actually. I remember that. Yeah.
Like it's like some people here have been here 1,000 times before.
Yeah.
And they don't know why, and they don't know what it is that motivates them, and they don't know why they're motivated.
So
they just know that there's more to it than this life.
you say you're not religious, but then you sound like you're.
Oh, I'm deeply spiritual. I've studied it.
Okay.
I was My mother was Catholic, my dad was an agnostic, and my mother left the Catholic Church because they said animals had no souls, and she became a Buddhist. If I had to pick a hat to wear, I'd be a Taoist. So I believe that life is exactly the way it needs to be. And if you think it's wrong, then it's your perspective that's wrong. It's not life that's wrong. And I think ultimately it's like there's something more to life than us. But I can explain most, I've been through New Age, mate. I was paid to be a tarot reader when I was in my mid-20s.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I just used to sit down, throw some cards out, imagine something, tell the person something, and they go, "Oh my God, you know things." And I'd be like, "Really? I just imagined something and told you it." I mean, it's really anyone who genuinely reader, they'll tell you that they don't understand it. They can't explain it. It's just they imagine stuff. Other people tell them it's real. And then I was kind of like, how does this work? And then when you study hypnosis, you understand what deep rapport is. So when you're in deep rapport, so if I'm good at maths and you suck at maths and we're getting along and we've been in conversation and we're in deep rapport with each other, just in my presence, you will be better at maths. So we transfer learnings at an unconscious level. And I mean skills that we don't even realize we transfer, which is why people are always better at something when they're around their master.
You believe in sight, like there's something beyond just like the mechanics of the mind.
Well, it's as I said, we're convinced into this world. We're a walking, talking meat battery. And that's what we're told we are. We eat food, we charge our battery up, and we go and we discharge our battery. We're just a battery. But we're not. There's swamis who don't eat for 40, 50 years or barely eat anything. How do they survive? I think they survive because we're not a meat battery. I've done some pretty heavy stuff when it comes to like water. I got access to Emoto's work before he died, and it hasn't been published. But I've seen some stuff with water that blows people's minds apart, and all that cars running on water and all that kind of stuff. That's all real.
Yeah.
It's all suppressed, but it's all real. And when you look at where majority water, I always explain to people there's two types of water in the world. There's the water that's in the basins underneath the ground, and that's where our tap water comes from. Then there's water from a mountain spring. The only difference between the two is a mountain has gravity, and gravity is actually static electricity. That's how, when you get into electromagnetics and dielectric energy and dielectric void and things like that, that's what it comes down to. So the water moves from the basin up through the mountain, gathers static electricity, and becomes electrically charged water. So when you drink spring water, you're drinking water that is effectively highly charged. We are predominantly water. So if our water is highly charged, we are sensitive. It's like we can sense things going on. It's like nowadays we forget, but you would have been from the day where the phone would ring and you'd guess who was on the other end and you'd get it right. And it's like, where does that sense? You're an aerial. You're an electromagnetic aerial. It's like scientists hate consciousness because consciousness sucks at being explained via science. If someone says to you, "What are you?" I would say, "What are you?" But not what you're told you are. And I thought about it, and I'm like, I'm this observer. I'm in this vessel somehow, and I'm an observer, and I see things and I hear things. So I observe, whether it be seeing, hearing, touching, whatever. But I observe things, and when I observe things, some things I react to. And when I react to them, I either react to them in love or fear, depending on which one. And when I react to them, I'm transmuting them. So everything we interact with or we observe, we have a relationship, we transmute. So the scientific law of this is the act of observation changes that which is being observed. Two-slit experiment, great way of saying it. So when I even look at somebody, I'm going to change them fractionally. Every interaction we have with everything is a manipulation. No one likes that word. So I transmute somebody just by looking at them. And if I'm feeling fear when I look at them, they might think I'm judging them. Oh, that person's judging me. If I look at them with love, they might feel good. Oh, look, they're smiling at me. I'm okay.
Yeah.
You can transmute a bunch of food into a hamburger. That could be a job. Maybe you're a burger flipper, the old McDonald's burger flipper when you're a teenager. You take that food. If you're scared, you transmute that hamburger with fear. And it doesn't taste as good as a home-cooked meal. A home-cooked meal is transmuted with love.
With love, yeah. Yeah, I know exactly where he's going there.
Yeah. And so I just, I've been around all the spiritual labs. I think, to me personally, Christianity's got some weird stuff they don't want to deal with, but the Jesuit mindset, love everybody.
I think they got the community positive things right and everything else, and how they structure society. They got that all right. But then
all religions kind of have this love, integrity, all the words around God.
Yeah,
before we, the word God is always an art, but every word around God, love, integrity, caring, sacrifice, all those words we all agree on. I think the issue is like God is this archetype that is a reflection of yourself.
Yeah.
Because we project ourselves into everything. And I think that's why you've got to know yourself. And the old, some of the Hindu values that, when you die, you're the one who is the judge to your own trial of whether you wasted your life or not.
Yeah.
So if a shallow person dies and gets to the end of, they're being judged by a shallow person, a great, a many lives person or whatever it is. And, I don't even think time actually exists the way we think it exists,
Yeah.
The idea of a past life, I think, is actually a joke, because if time's not real, like we're assuming time's real because we experience it, but it could just be an experiential thing. I think that just we have a consciousness, and our consciousness extends way beyond us. And I think there's consequences to what we do to our consciousness, and if there's a heaven and hell, then it's, it's like we electrically are charged. And when you're in the right state, you attract the right thing. When you're in a bad state, you attract bad things. Don't make big decisions in bad states, that old kind of saying.
Yeah.
And it's like if we could explain electromagnetics entirely, I think we would just see ourselves as we're not individuals. We're part of an electrical grid that we're all connected to. And every time we have a node ping on another piece of the electrical grid, another being, we do it with love or fear. And we move that being one way or another, love or fear way. And I think at the end of your life, you get there, and it's like, if there is a God, then I think he just looks at how far you move things with love or how far you move things with fear, and that's the hell or the heaven. Well, you move things with love, you go to heaven. You move things with fear, you go to hell, for example. If you get reincarnated, then, you go up the chain. If you're doing it with love, you go down the chain. If you're doing it with hell, maybe, after being a human, if you do everything with love, you come back as a cat that's spoiled, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But I definitely think no matter what religion you believe in, we are transmutational beings. And as you said, it's like, we're not gods, but we are in a way. We don't control, we're not, it's like the idea of the flat earth argument to the globe. It's like, who cares what shape this thing is? We're in some realm. Human beings, for as much as we know, we don't know where we came from, to be honest. We can't prove where we came from. We can't actually prove what we are, to be honest, or how we got here. And we don't even know where we are, to be honest. Because a lot of the companies who go, oh, you're on this spinning rock, it's like, well, can I really trust you? Like, I don't know. I'll never know for myself firsthand.
Yeah.
Until I do, it's just hearsay, all of it. So I just go, well, why would I care if the earth's flat, round, or whatever? I care about the love or the fear I put into the world. And this is the difference in discussion. I think that's the paradigm shift we need to get to, and that's those little old ladies. They're like, don't talk about those scary things. It's not good for life. They're just talking about be loving,
Yep.
If you've got nothing to say nothing. If you've nothing good to say nothing at all.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to bring something constructive to the conversation. That's a love transmutation.
Yeah.
You can love something by just leaving it be.
Exactly.
Anyway, mate.
No, it was great. It was great. I might even have to try and include that bit as well. It was brilliant.
Oh yeah, I could sit with the philosophic thing. I love these things.